You're with ABC News. It's 9 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. in the West. We begin with breaking news this morning. The US President has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which will come into effect in the coming hours. Donald Trump praised the two countries for having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end the war. We'll get the latest from our reporters and correspondents in just a moment on this rapidly evolving situation. The major development comes after Iran launched a retaliatory strike on America's largest airbase in the Middle East. 14 missiles were fired at the Al Ubaid air facility in Qatar, but most were intercepted and the base had been evacuated. We'll have a full breakdown with military analyst David Kilcullen shortly. The volatile situation in the Middle East is causing global flight chaos, with airlines diverting traffic around the region. Qatar's airspace has now been reopened, but the knock-on effects are expected to last for days. And while we've had those major developments in the Middle East, leaders are preparing to gather in Brussels for this week's NATO summit. Russia has launched another massive air attack on Ukraine overnight, with at least 9 people killed in and around the capital, Kyiv. All of these major world events are impacting markets, with Australian shares due to begin trading in around an hour. We'll get a sense of how stocks across different sectors are being affected, particularly the price of oil. It's Tuesday, the 24th of June. I'm Melissa McKay from the land of the Darug people in Parramatta in Western Sydney. This is ABC News Mornings. The US President Donald Trump says Iran and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. Mr. Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that there will be a complete and total ceasefire that'll be phased in over 24 hours, at which point he says the war will be considered ended. He's congratulated both countries for having what he says is the stamina, courage and intelligence to end the 12-day war. There's been no confirmation of the truce from Israeli or Iranian leaders, but international media organisation Reuters is reporting that Qatar's Prime Minister secured Iran's agreement in a call with Tehran. It comes hours after Iran retaliated to the US bombing of its nuclear sites by launching missiles at American bases in Qatar. People in Doha witnessed a series of explosions and flashes in the sky as air defence systems intercepted the projectiles. There have been no reports of casualties. Several Gulf states temporarily closed their airspace as a precaution. Qatar has condemned Iran's strike, calling it a violation of its sovereignty and international law.
This attack represents a blatant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar and a contradiction to the principles of good neighbourliness, and represents an aggression on international legitimacy and international law. And the state of Qatar confirms that it holds the right of response in accordance with the international laws and in accordance with the shape and size of this attack.
The Al Ubaid Air Base serves as a main regional military hub for American forces and is located about 30 kilometres southwest of Doha. Despite widespread criticism for its retaliatory strikes, there were celebrations on the streets of Tehran.
We will die, but we will never accept humiliation, and we will stand our ground here. We are not afraid of bombings, missiles, or anything else. We are defending our land.
A woman has told Iranian media that her home on the 3rd floor of a building was hit after Israel completed what it called the most extensive wave of attacks it's ever carried out in Tehran. It also struck a prison which houses many political and foreign detainees, extending strikes beyond military and nuclear targets. In Israel, the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has been surveying damage to areas hit by Iranian missiles. Whether the ceasefire takes effect and holds remains to be seen.
This war will end when our objectives, those two main key objectives, are met. that ballistic missile program that reaches us here in Israel, but has the capacity to reach much further afield, much further afield, and also that nuclear weapons program. There is no scenario where Iran can have a nuclear weapon.
Well, let's bring in our America's editor, John Lyons, now with some analysis on this situation. John, this is all moving very quickly. At 3 o'clock this morning, we were talking about Iranian strikes on a US base. Now we're talking about a ceasefire. Just take us through the developments this morning.
Well, Melissa, President Trump announced a short time ago that he had brokered a ceasefire between Israel and Iran that will begin coming in from 6 hours. It'll be staggered between 6 and 12 hours. And then basically it'll be a total and complete ceasefire after that. He's obviously used his leverage on both the Israelis and the Iranians to bring this about. It followed a remarkable day where the Iranians, responding to the weekend attack by the Americans on their nuclear facilities, decided to respond. But he has said on Truth Social, you can see that it's been fully agreed to. 6 hours from now, the ceasefire will begin. And he says, I would like to congratulate both Israel and Iran on having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end what should be called the 12th-day war. This is a war that could have gone on for years, he said, and destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel, God bless Iran, God bless the Middle East, God bless the United States of America, God bless the world. And so the Iranians responded by their attack on that US military base, Al Udeid, in Doha in Qatar, but it was very much going through the motions in a way because the Iranians quite bizarrely or interestingly warned the United States they were going to make the attack. Therefore, the United States made sure there were no US soldiers vulnerable at that base. It was cleared out. Most of the missiles were intercepted anyway by Qatar. And then Donald Trump thanked Iran for the advance notice, thanks for the heads up, which when you think about it, is remarkable of itself that the United States president is thanking Iran for giving warning that they are going to attack a United States military base. But it just shows you how internecine all of the movement and the politics is here. And then I think on the basis of the weekend, I think the Iranians were shocked by the fact that Donald Trump was prepared to drop those 14 bunker buster bombs on the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. Meanwhile, Israel was cranking up its attacks, emboldened by America's support. But Donald Trump's used his leverage to get that ceasefire, and we don't know yet what will then happen. Donald Trump has said, he wants a unconditional surrender, which means an end to their nuclear aspirations in Iran. They would not have done that 12 months ago, but Iran is now very vulnerable. It's the weakest it's been since 1979, since the Islamic Revolution, and I think, therefore, the Iranians will be more prepared to accept those conditions than they would have been even 6 or 12 months ago.
Yeah, so John, what do we know about how these ceasefire negotiations have come about? It does seem to have happened quite quickly.
Well, Caroline Levitt, the press officer for Donald Trump, gave a hint of this earlier today when she said that there were discussions going on, back channels in a way, between the US, the Iranians, the Israelis, the Qataris, yet again, have been mediators, as they have often in Gaza. So the Qataris are quite close to Iran, which adds that element of remarkability to all of this, the fact that Iran attacked a US military base on Qatari soil at the very same time that Qatar, with the United States, was trying to broker this ceasefire. So we don't know exactly yet what the mechanics were, but Donald Trump clearly takes pleasure in announcing ceasefires. He announced recently, of course, between Pakistan and India, that there was a ceasefire in their hostilities, and he took great pleasure 2 or 3 weeks ago in announcing that the Houthis had agreed not to fire at ships going by Yemen because he said they didn't want to be bombed anymore. So it's interesting that Donald Trump, who does try to portray himself as the peacemaking president, appears to have brought an end to this war 48 hours after the United States got involved.
And have we heard yet, John, from Iran or Israel or any other nations in the Middle East about, since this ceasefire news broke?
Iran has said that they accept this deal and are happy to accept it. I haven't heard yet from the Israeli side. In the last few hours, those Israeli attacks have increased. In a way, though, because Israel sees itself as winning this war militarily, which it clearly is. Israel maintained or secured essentially control over the aerial supremacy in Iran in a very short time. Israel has a very powerful air force. Iran has old and depleted aircraft. It doesn't have an air force that can compete with the Israelis. And so therefore Israel wanted to prosecute its military advantage here. So I don't think I think Israel would have been the resistant party, like in Gaza. Although many people have called for an end to the war in Gaza, Israel has wanted to keep that going because essentially they're winning and they want to once and for all ensure that Hamas can never have any capability to do what they did on October 7. So I don't think the Israelis would have particularly wanted this, but Donald Trump has significant leverage over them. They underwrite a lot of the Americans underwrite a lot of the Israeli military. They supply a lot of the bombs. And also Donald Trump did a big favour to the Israelis the other day. They wanted those bunker buster bombs, which they don't have. They wanted America to drop. And Donald Trump agreed to that, and therefore I think he would have had leverage to say to them, OK, I've attacked these 3 nuclear facilities. I've given you we've used these bunker buster bombs. Now you've got to give me something. You've got to agree to a ceasefire. And the Israelis are not going to want to alienate Donald Trump or any US administration.
Yeah, John, you've sort of touched on it there. Donald Trump has really placed himself at the centre of a lot of this. How is that being received domestically at home in the States?
Well, Americans are fatigued by foreign wars, going back to the days of Vietnam and South Korea and Iraq. A lot of Americans have died in foreign wars, many of which have proved, like Iraq, to be completely fruitless. And if there's one thing most Americans, Democrat, Republican and Independent, agree on, is they don't want their sons and daughters and grandsons and granddaughters dying in foreign wars. Talk to any American and they'll tell you. I mean, a lot of them can't even show you on a map where Ukraine is, let alone the Middle East. But they don't want their sons and daughters dying in foreign wars. Donald Trump tapped into that for his re-election. That whole America First, driven by Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson and the MAGA part of the Republican Party. And so Donald Trump has championed that view, but he's managed to convince Americans that the weekend bombing was surgical, short-term, in, out, nuclear facilities, no ground troops. So politically, he was on fairly strong ground with that, but I don't think Americans would have wanted it to expand. And had the Iranians responded by killing 10 or 20 American soldiers, then I think the United States, Donald Trump, would have felt he had no choice but to go in, and then it would have escalated. And I think that's the reason Iran went out of its way in the last few hours to say to the Americans, by the way, just to let you know, we're going to attack one of your military bases in Doha, if that's okay. Can you make sure there's no one there so no one will be killed? I mean, when you think about the art of war, that in itself is extraordinary.
All right, America's editor John Lyons there for us in Washington, DC. Thank you. Our Middle East correspondent Alison Horn is standing by for us now in Tel Aviv. Ali, hi there. What are you hearing on the ground there about this ceasefire and how this has all come about?
Yeah, good morning, Mel. So far, very quiet on the Israeli front. There hasn't been any official confirmation or denial from any Israeli officials. I did question the Israeli military, asking them to comment on whether or not this ceasefire is something that Israel has agreed to. Their response to me, and I quote, is, hello, please refer to the political echelon. I have put questions to the political leaders here in Israel, but so far we haven't received anything. I've been monitoring Hebrew media over the last hour or so. They are not reporting anything either. It isn't massively surprising, given it is a 2:15 in the morning now, 2:15 a.m. here in Israel. It's about 2:45 a.m. in Tehran. So very early in the morning, so not that unusual that I guess we haven't heard anything. But if this is true, I expect that we will start to hear some sort of confirmation coming through within the coming hours. I have also been trying to get in touch with people inside Iran, but as I mentioned, it is really early there. Sorry, I'm just checking my phone to see if I've got some messages that are coming through. It does appear that Reuters have been told by Iranian officials that they have agreed to this ceasefire that has been mediated by Qatar, is what we're hearing, and that in itself is interesting, given that we saw Qatar was the country where this US Army base was attacked. It also, though, isn't that unusual if Qatar was a mediator, given that Qatar has played such a key role in trying to mediate in another major conflict in this area, the Israel-Gaza war, and trying to secure a ceasefire there over the last 21 months or so. So this is what we're hearing on the ground at the moment. It's still very early. People here in this region will be waking up in a few hours to find out whether or not this is the end of this war. But we do also know that in the last few hours we have received from the Israeli military a number of alerts warning residents in 3 different areas in Tehran to leave the area. They've issued what they're calling evacuation warnings, telling people that if they remain in those areas that they could be killed, because Israel is planning to target those areas in the next few hours. We have heard that Israel is currently striking in Tehran. It isn't that unusual to see in the hours before a ceasefire a massive bombardment. We've heard and we've seen in Gaza, for example, that in the hours before a ceasefire it can often be some of the most intense fighting and dangerous bombardment that is seen. So that could be replicated here in the Iran-Israel war as well. But at this stage, we really actually just don't even know if Israel has agreed to this ceasefire.
Yeah, as you said, Ali, it's still, of course, very early in the morning for you there. If this ceasefire is to go ahead, just how long until you would expect to see that ceasefire really begin, and how do you expect it will be received over there?
Yeah, so according to Donald Trump's messages, it looks like a ceasefire, if it is to go ahead, would start in about 5 hours' time from the Iranian side. So Iran would have to stop firing missiles within 5 hours, and then it looks like Israel would have another 12 hours to continue firing airstrikes into Iran. And then, according to Donald Trump's message, that would be the start of the official ceasefire. I've been speaking with people in Tehran and also more widely across Iran over the last couple of days. And Mel, I should tell you, it's actually really difficult to be in touch with people inside Iran. There are a number of impediments. Foreign journalists like myself are very rarely allowed in there. There isn't really freedom of the press in there. It's state-run media, so it's hard to really ascertain what's truthfully happening on the ground. And on top of that, there are these rolling internet blackouts and social media crackdowns. And anybody who speaks out against the regime there, publicly or privately, is at risk of arrest and detention. Even people have been killed by the Revolutionary Guard there for speaking out against the regime. So there are all these factors that make it incredibly difficult to actually talk to real people there and to get a sense of what's happening. But I do have a number of contacts in there that I've been speaking with over the last couple of days, and they have said to me that their number one fear that if a ceasefire happens and the regime is still standing, that is the regime of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, that because Iran has been weakened by this externally, it's taken a pounding by Israel, its nuclear facilities have been hit severely by the United States, that the fear from people on the ground is that the regime will crack down even harder internally on anti-regime supporters. That would mean that there would be perhaps more checkpoints on the streets, more phone searches, more monitoring of people. The people that I have been speaking with has put it to me in these terms, that the oppression would be even more severe. One woman that I was speaking to said, if the regime doesn't topple in this war, then God help us, we will all die. That might sound like an extreme sentiment, but you've got to think about the context of what's going on within Iran at the moment, and so much suggestion that this could have led to the toppling of the Ayatollah there. There is a lot of support for him and his regime inside Iran, but there is a lot of opponents of the regime as well who see this as a brutal regime that oppresses women, that oppresses freedom of speech, that oppresses freedom of expression. And a lot of people there saw this as a narrow window of opportunity to have that regime end, and perhaps for a new political establishment to be taking place there. I think I'm going to see over the next couple of hours from my contacts there, as they wake up and digest this news, if they can in fact get access to the internet, that there will be a lot of people feeling some mixed emotions. One, they would obviously be happy that their country is no longer at war, but I think there would be a lot of concern about what's going to happen internally with this possible crackdown even further by the Ayatollah regime.
A lot more to come as people wake up to this news in the Middle East. Alison Horn in Tel Aviv there for us. Thanks so much. Well, let's bring in David Kilcullen now, a counterinsurgency expert and former advisor to the Bush administration, as well as a professor at the Centre on the Future of War. Hi there, David. Thank you so much for your time. We've just seen this morning a major announcement from the US president that a ceasefire has been reached between Israel and Iran. Just take us through what we do know so far about this ceasefire agreement.
Well, it's big if true, I guess would be the way to summarise it. All we have right now is a tweet from President Trump asserting that it's been agreed. Evidently, the Iranians have confirmed that they negotiated something through the good offices of Qatar, but we have no confirmation at all from Israel as of yet. And Israel is the key player here because Israel's goals in the war have arguably not yet been achieved. And the key missing piece of the puzzle is the allegedly about 400 kilos of highly enriched uranium that Iran was supposed to be in the process of converting into some kind of a bomb, which is still missing and unaccounted for. No confirmation of where that might be, or indeed of whether the strikes on the 3 nuclear facilities that were conducted over the weekend were actually successful in destroying the Iranian nuclear capability. So while Israel believes that its war aims have not yet been met, I'm going to say I'd be rather skeptical that they will be ready to jump into a ceasefire as soon as Donald Trump's truth seems to suggest. So I think we'll have to wait and see. As your correspondent said, I think we'll find out pretty soon because it's almost dawn in Tel Aviv, and I think the Israeli reaction to this is going to be the determining factor.
Yeah, as we've just heard from Alison Horn there, it is very early hours in the morning there. How long do you expect it might be before we do hear from Israel about where they stand on this ceasefire?
Well, I think we'd anticipate hearing from them in the next, 2 or 3 hours, some kind of official confirmation that they are agreeing to the ceasefire, if indeed they are. But as you've already noted as well, it's a staggered ceasefire. So Iran has to stop operating first, and then Israel has a number of more hours to keep on striking Iran, and that could be a period where they try to basically finish off all the target sets that they've been trying to engage. And we've seen repeatedly in the past that ceasefires can fall over at the last minute as each side tries to burnish its position leading into the end of hostilities. So I think there's a lot of things to still drop into place before we can say the ceasefire will happen. If indeed it does, it would be quite a remarkable 24-hour period and an even more remarkable 72 hours across the Middle East. And it's worth noting that this is the very first time on over multiple decades of confrontation between Iran and the United States that the US has ever directly mounted a military strike into Iran's territory. So the Iranian regime had to do something in order to retaliate. It seems that what they've done is a fairly performative retaliation, very similar in some ways to what they did after Qasem Soleimani was killed in 2020. So it's almost a replay of that series of events almost 5 years ago.
If this ceasefire does take effect, as the US president insists that it will, what do you think could have changed in the last few hours, given that we had been seeing, and we have been seeing, as Ali just mentioned, escalating barrages of attacks from both Israel and Iran over the last few days?
Yeah, I think many people are surprised by the performative nature of the Iranian strike on Al Udeid Air Base. I'm not actually surprised by that. That's very similar to what they did after Qasem Soleimani was killed, an attempt to, if you like, demonstrate to their own population that they are retaliating for the strikes, but not result in a further escalation with the United States or Israel when the Iranian regime is in a fairly shaky regional position. I think that, as one of your correspondents mentioned, this is the weakest that the regime has been in decades, but it's not at all weak at home, and I don't think there's any prospect of the regime falling over. So what you're seeing here is, as you often see from the regime in Tehran, prioritization of regime survival over every other factor. So they, seem to be accepting the loss of some portion of their nuclear program as the price for preserving the regime itself.
Overnight, it did seem as though Israel was pretty set on seeing a regime change in Iran. Why would it now agree to a ceasefire if it has?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer to that is we don't know, right? I mean, we don't know if they've agreed to a ceasefire. And I would be surprised if they accept a ceasefire without first making their best attempt to fully destroy the Iranian nuclear program, which obviously they started that effort about 11 days ago. So, and again, as I said, the key missing piece is the enriched uranium, which is, after all, the cause of the conflict in the first place and remains unaccounted for. But right before the US strikes on Fordow, there were convoys of trucks turning up to the site, and one theory is that they were actually evacuating parts of that stockpile. It's also worth noting that there were unexplained movements of a very large number of Chinese cargo aircraft into Iranian airspace immediately prior to the strikes. So it's quite possible that the Iranians have sought to safeguard or maintain possession of that highly enriched uranium, which would then mean that the whole war might have been this might be a temporary ceasefire in something that turns out to be a larger and longer-term confrontation.
Israel had expanded its attacks in Iran. Overnight, we saw it hit the Evin prison. Can you just take us through what Israel's intentions in this war with Iran have been?
So Israel has been extraordinarily victorious militarily over the last 6 months. We've seen the fall of the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. We've seen Hezbollah in Lebanon very seriously degraded. We've seen Israeli troops now occupying decisive terrain, the summit of Mount Hermon, which sits on the three-way border between Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. We've seen them moving into areas of Lebanon, of Syria that they've never occupied before, with Israeli tanks only about 20 kilometers from Damascus in Syria. So really extraordinary military success on the part of the Israelis in the last 6 months. But at the same time, international public opinion has been some of the most negative that Israel's ever experienced, with sanctions being talked about and multiple traditional friends of Israel turning against at least the Netanyahu government, not necessarily the state of Israel. So Israel needed to flip the script and to transform the war from being, if you like, big Israel against little Gaza to being little Israel against big Iran. And Iran is much bigger than Israel by almost every measure, including its military budget. So I think this has been a political move to try to flip the script and change the international perception of the war. And a key part of that is wiping out what Israel has long regarded as an existential threat, which is the alleged Iranian nuclear program. So I think what we're seeing here is an attempt to take advantage of a positive military situation in order to transform the political situation and remove this long-term threat against Israel. Whether or not they've succeeded in doing that is a different question. And I think there's obviously been significant military success against Iran's air force, against its military command and control structure, and potentially against its nuclear program, depending on what the ultimate outcome of the US strikes turns out to be. And I think the last 24 hours or so of the war have seen Israel broadening the target set to try to undermine the grip of Iran's regime over its public. And it may very well be that move to targeting the regime's own grip on power has been the critical thing that forced Iran to think about a ceasefire, because, as I said earlier, that's ultimately what the regime in Tehran is trying to protect, its own grip on power.
At what point, or could we ever really know just how successful the US strikes on those nuclear targets have been?
I think we will eventually figure it out, but it's not going to be something that emerges in the next few hours. It'll be a combination of technical reporting on some maybe cyber and signals intelligence, possibly human sources, confirming what actually happened during these strikes and what the level of damage was. I don't think we're going to see the Iranians accept international inspectors anytime soon. They've actually been talking about the opposite, about withdrawing from some of the safeguarding arrangements as a result of the strike. So I think it's going to really take quite a while for the full details to emerge. And again, we would want to see something fairly concrete before we can be sure that the regime's nuclear weapons program is fully ended.
Iran's proxies in Hezbollah, the Houthis and Hamas are all otherwise occupied or have been somewhat diminished. What impact does that have on Iran's power?
So that's true of Hamas and it's true of Hezbollah. The Houthis are an exception. The Houthis have successfully demonstrated that they can shut the Red Sea to civilian shipping traffic. They've also successfully survived a US and allied series of attempts, as well as Israeli attempts to damage their control in Yemen. And they're actually doing pretty well in terms of the ability to survive and keep operating. So the Houthis are an important ally of Iran that still remains a key player. The other two big international allies are China and Russia, both of which have expressed support for Iran and criticism for both Israel and the United States. And then they also have a number of regional proxies, in particular the Hashd al-Shabi, the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq, which are a series of militias that continue to support Iran. So they still have cards to play, even though they're in a much weaker state than they were previously. And I think we're going to see those groups start to recover pretty heavily. That's probably also part of Israel's calculation, in that if you suspend what has been, as I said, a very successful series of military moves before you complete the job, the ability of the threat to regenerate is probably quite significant.
And David, just to take it back to just a few hours ago, we saw this strike on the Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar. Can you just give us a bit of context, I suppose, on how critical it is to US operations and what we know about this airbase? Why was it targeted by Iran?
Well, it's pretty clear why it was targeted. It is the most important US base in the region, not so much because of its size, although it is very big. It has between 5,000 and 10,000 US personnel, depending on whether you're in the middle of a rotation of forces or not. But it's the site of US Central Command Headquarters Forward and the site of US Special Operations Command Central and a number of other key US headquarters. So it's a key command and control site within the entire US laydown in the Middle East. That's why it was a prominent target. And I think the goal here was to send a message by showing that Iran could in fact strike that target just outside Doha in Qatar. But as I said, it's rather similar to what happened after the killing of Qasem Soleimani in 2020. Your viewers may remember that Qasem Soleimani was the head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps' Quds Force, their special forces, and he was killed in Baghdad in 2020. In retaliation for that, Iran struck the Al-Assad Air Base, another major US base in the region, but did so again with a warning ahead of time, and did so in such a way that it didn't kill any American troops. So it's an attempt to demonstrate we can retaliate, but also to demonstrate that we are not seeking an escalation, right? Sometimes called an off-ramp retaliation. And that, I think, is what we've seen here.
All right, military strategist David Kilcullen there for us. Thank you so much for your time and insights this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Mel.
Let's return home now and bring in our political reporter, Nicole Hegarty, who's in Canberra for us this morning. Nicole, hi there. What have we heard from the federal government so far in relation to these major developments this morning?
Hi, Mel. So we heard earlier today both the government and the opposition condemning the strikes by Iran on Qatar, on the US airbase in Qatar. Then, a short time ago, we have received a statement from the Prime Minister in response to this reported ceasefire that President Trump has referenced on his Truth social media platform. That statement, just reading that, it says that Anthony Albanese in that statement says that Australia welcomes the President's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and again reiterates his government has consistently called for dialogue, diplomacy and de-escalation. He says the safety of Australians in the region is the government's priority, saying they continue to closely monitor developments and are deeply concerned about keeping Australians safe in the region, and they are continuing to closely monitor that as well. So that's the latest update we've heard following on from President Donald Trump's comments on social media that a ceasefire has been secured and will come into effect in the coming hours, Mel.
And Nicole, what is the latest for Australians trying to leave the region?
We're yet to hear an update post both the strikes overnight and also the reports of a ceasefire, but we have seen that the numbers have continued to grow over the recent days. That number of Australians and their family members looking to leave the region, so collectively Israel and Iran, is now in excess of 4,000. So over 4,000 people looking for assistance from the Department of Foreign Affairs to leave the area. A previous attempt last night to get some of those in Israel out of the region by a repatriation flight was cancelled amid further strikes from Iran on Israel. As I say, we haven't heard any more since this news of a ceasefire, but we have seen that the US, the State Department, has reported that 7 flights have departed Israel carrying some 250 US citizens and family members out of Israel, so that the US has been able to facilitate some repatriation flights. But as to when Australia will be able to do likewise, we wait and see.
All right, Nicole Haggerty there for us in Canberra. Thank you. Well, the closure of airspace in Doha has left many Australians stranded after their flights were cancelled. 4 flights were due to leave Doha for Australia for Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Our reporter Kate Mead is at Melbourne Airport for us this morning. Hi there, Kate. What are you hearing from people there?
Thank you. About 3:20 this morning, that's when airports really did start to activate in terms of trying to get in contact with passengers flying over the Middle East, any type of travel going into that airspace. Things rapidly started to change. So this has been an ongoing situation this morning in terms of what is going on with flights. So when I talk to you now, please know that this is the information that I have, and it will continue to change as the day goes by. I do have a statement that has come from Qantas today. It has said due to Air Force closures and congestion in the Middle East resulting in air traffic restrictions, QF9 Perth to London has been diverted to Singapore, and QF33 Perth to Paris is returning to Perth. Now, they are going to continue to monitor the airspace availability closely and will alter their schedule as required. Now, in terms of the flight that has been diverted to Singapore, that is QF9, they are carrying 199 customers and 14 crew. They will be staying in Singapore overnight. And the flight that is returning to Perth, that is carrying 216 customers, passengers and 14 crew, and they will be accommodated in Perth overnight. So it is a changing situation when it comes to airlines. The international airports across Australia are reminding passengers to allow extra time, and that if they are travelling today or over the next couple of days, to check in with their airline that they're travelling with to see what the updates were. I was able to catch up with some passengers, Melissa, that arrived from Dubai overnight. They've been travelling for 20 plus hours this morning, and I wanted to see what they saw at the airport. How did that feel, and how did it feel landing back in Australia? Here's a little of what they had to say. Was there an increased security, or were there more warnings? Tell me what you saw.
More security. There was a lot more people around that were assisting and directing, and yeah, there's quite a few people there.
Did become a bit of a worry that we were a bit concerned and that we hadn't heard anything. So obviously we were a little bit dubious getting into Dubai. I did notice when we were flying into Dubai, I was so much more aware of where we were flying over. I was looking through the window anxiously to see if I could see anything or if there were any warning signs that I should worry about. But yeah, it was mainly from home that we heard the news. There wasn't a lot of telecast.
So many of those passengers are happy to arrive back in Australia, and you heard them describing then that for some of them they didn't quite know what had happened because they were in the flight but switching on their phones and then connecting to the flight Wi-Fi, they were able to see messages from family and friends. So the message at the moment, once again, is that those flying particularly to the Middle East today or over the next couple of days are being told to please check in with the airline that they are flying with and keep up to date with those updates. Thank you, Melissa.
All right, Kate Mead in Melbourne there. Thank you. We're returning overseas now. The leader of the NATO alliance says the focus of this week's summit will be the war in Ukraine after the country's capital came under attack from Russian forces again. Ukrainian officials say at least 7 people have been killed and several apartment buildings damaged after Russia launched more than 350 drones and missiles. But there's concern developments in the Middle East could overshadow the NATO summit. Europe correspondent Elias Kluwer is in The Hague.
Kyiv under attack yet again. This Russian airstrike began in the dead of night with that terrifying buzz of drones being heard across the city. People made their way to various bomb shelters across the Ukrainian capital, but tragically at least 9 people have been killed. The Ukrainian military says it shot down at least 300 Russian drones, and the president of the country, Volodymyr Zelensky, spent Monday in the United Kingdom. First with the King at Windsor Castle, then the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, where he said he'd discuss once again imposing more sanctions on Moscow. Now, here in The Hague, the Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has said that he's hoping this week's summit can see the alliance's countries agree on a 5% of GDP minimum defence spend. He says a majority of that new defence investment will go towards deterring Russia and protecting Ukraine.
But let me give you a few examples of what we will invest in. A 5-fold increase in air defense capabilities, because we see Russia's deadly terror from the skies over Ukraine every day, and we must be able to defend ourselves from such attacks.
The NATO Secretary-General says Russia remains the alliance's most direct and significant threat and will be the primary focus of this week's summit. But the presence of Donald Trump and a new war in the Middle East may see that get top billing.
This is ABC News. I'm Melissa McKay. These are the top stories we're following this morning. US President Donald Trump says a ceasefire between Israel and Iran will come into effect within hours. He's congratulated the two countries on having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end what he's calling the 12-day war. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has welcomed the announcement. He says the situation is being closely monitored and the safety of Australians in the region remains a priority. President Trump's announcement came hours after Iran launched missiles at a US military base in Qatar. Officials say the attack was successfully intercepted and no one was injured as the base had been evacuated earlier in the day. President Trump labelled the retaliatory attack a very weak response. Qatar Airways says flights are resuming as the country reopens its airspace, but disruptions are expected to continue for days. Dubai, Kuwait and Bahrain also briefly suspended flights. Qantas and Virgin Australia have diverted flights away from the region, with Australians travelling overseas urged to stay in contact with their airlines. The developments in the Middle East come as leaders prepare to gather in Brussels for this week's NATO summit. The leader of NATO says allies must up their defence spending to deter Russia after Moscow launched yet another deadly attack on the Ukrainian capital. More than 350 drones and missiles were fired, killing at least 9 people in and around Kyiv. Uncertainty remains around 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that Iran is thought to possess. The International Atomic Energy Authority said last month that it was seriously concerned that Iran now had stocks of the substance at 60% purity, which is well above the level used for civilian purposes. The US and Israel have targeted Iran's nuclear site, but it's not known if they've succeeded in destroying its nuclear program.
Once again, the Iranian nuclear facility at Fordo was attacked, this time by Israeli missiles, targeting what its military said were access routes to the site buried many metres below. This only hours after Donald Trump claimed Fordo had been obliterated by US bunker-busting bombs. The UN nuclear watchdog spoke instead of very significant damage, with plants and buildings hit at 2 other nuclear facilities. But what's worrying officials is not just the damage to Iran's nuclear equipment, but the whereabouts and status of the uranium it's already highly enriched.
We must return to the negotiating table. And for that, allow IAEA inspectors, the guardians on our behalf of the NPT, to go back to Iran's nuclear sites and account for the stockpiles of uranium, including, most importantly, the 400 kilograms enriched to 60%.
Experts say that uranium is likely to be held in gas form and could be contained in about 10 large pressurised canisters and easily transportable in 1 lorry. But it would need substantial equipment to enrich it further so it could be used in a bomb.
Iranians have told the IAEA, this was on June 12th before the Israeli military strikes, is that they have set up a new facility that is well protected, at which they would be able to enrich uranium. As far as we know, that location is not known, probably not to the Americans, probably not to the Israelis, but it would probably be a matter of weeks, if not months, to enrich that stockpile.
So that missing uranium could be anywhere. There have been reports it was removed from the 3 sites here hit by the United States. It could be at a new unknown facility, or it could have been divided up and hidden in separate locations. While the White House says it's confident the bulk of the uranium was destroyed, the Israelis, for now, are being coy.
And we have interesting intel on that, which you'll excuse me if I don't share it with you.
Concerns remain about Iran's nuclear ambitions, even now.
My biggest fear would be for Iran to own and be able to use and deploy a nuclear weapon. It would be a stranglehold on Israel, on the whole region and other parts of the world.
Meanwhile, Iran stepped up its missile attacks on Israel, a country that neither confirms nor denies its own suspected nuclear capability.
Well, let's get more now on the developing news out of the Middle East. We're joined by former Middle East and US correspondent Ben Knight. Hi there, Ben. So this is all moving very quickly. Could you just give us a bit of a recap of the last few hours? At 3 o'clock this morning, we were talking about Iranian strikes on a US base. Now we're talking about a potential ceasefire. Just take us through what we know.
It's been a bit of a head-snapping morning, to be honest, and I'm talking about that in the context of 11 days where there have been some pretty stunning moments, not least of which, of course, was that surprise attack by the United States on those Iranian uranium sites. But so, yes, we woke up pretty early this morning to the news that Iran had undertaken its long-threatened response to the United States over that bombing attack. It then turned out that the Iranian response was, well, measured, restrained, choose your word, but by essentially picking a target, alerting the target that the missiles were on the way. I think all of the missiles were intercepted and that was kind of it. And also the Iranians deciding to and saying that they had used an equal number of missiles in the attack on the US base in Qatar as the United States dropped on Iran. So that was really sort of saying, well, we're going to do to you what you did to us. Obviously, there's a huge difference in the size of the bombs that were dropped. But effectively what it did was it was enough of a show of strength, enough of a face-saving exercise to draw a line under it and to prevent the spiralling of retaliation that could have drawn the US further into it. So that was where we were at that time, thinking, OK, well, if this has now stopped, where does that leave the Iran-Israel war? Well, apparently all of that time, the United States, through Qatar, the same country that Iran had sent the missiles into towards that US base, the Qataris had been helping the United States to broker a ceasefire between Iran and Israel. That was completely unexpected, completely out of the blue, and I have to say, hasn't yet fully been confirmed as we've been hearing. Reuters has reporting Iranian officials as confirming that they've agreed to a proposal put to them by the Qataris. Haven't heard from Israel yet. Bear in mind, it's in the wee early hours of the morning in both those countries. But, you know, it would be a stunning development if Donald Trump's statement and his promise that you can see on the screen there, that a ceasefire has been brokered and will come into effect in about 4 hours from now. It'd be stunning if that didn't turn out to be the case. It certainly looks as though that's the case. And if that is the case, that's a pretty significant foreign policy achievement for Donald Trump, at least in the short term, because as we've also been hearing from David Kilcullen and the piece you just played, there are still some very, very big questions over whether this has in fact stopped any Iranian nuclear weapons program, and big questions also about whether in fact in some ways it might have triggered it to speed up.
Yeah, Ben, as you say, we're still yet to hear from Israel in relation to this ceasefire announcement. But what could have changed, do you think? Why could we suddenly be looking at a bit of a cooling off in this war?
Well, David Kilcullen made the point very well that Iran has been absolutely hammered, not just in this conflict, but really over the past couple of years by Israel and by others, but mostly by Israel. 2 years ago, Iran was an existential threat to Israel. Israel said that, and the reason wasn't just because of its long-held concerns that Iran was developing a nuclear weapon. Iran has been openly hostile to Israel since the 1979 Islamic Revolution, belligerent, threatening, but Iran also exercised its power through its proxies in the region. And in the space of the last 18 months, those proxies in the region have been diminished, degraded, weakened severely by Israel and by others. So you have Hamas in Gaza, you have Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. I mean, Hezbollah was the world's biggest military force, not that was a part of a nation state, and there it was on Israel's northern border. Israel humiliated Hezbollah through those operations involving exploding pages and mobile phones, and killed its leader Hassan Nasrallah. That was something that was thought to be probably unthinkable, but it's happened. Then, of course, you've seen the fall of the Assad regime in Syria. The Houthis in Yemen remain a force, but and then on top of all that, you had Israel's attack on Iran itself, which has been happening over the last 10 or 11 days. And you have seen Israel dominate the skies, very, very quickly take control of the skies. It attacked missile sites, it attacked other infrastructure. It really dealt a blow to Iran's ability to retaliate, not just by destroying its missile sites, but also by having its own missile defence system, which prevented the missiles from retaliating against Israel effectively.
All right, former correspondent Ben Knight there for us. Thanks very much. That's ABC News for now. There's more on the ABC News app and, of course, on ABC iView. I'm Melissa McKay. Our breaking news this morning, Donald Trump has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran on his Truth Social platform. We're yet to hear any official acknowledgement from either combatant. Stay with us on the ABC News channel for more.
We are off to see something that's not happened in decades.
Doctors are blowing the whistle on what went wrong.
This was probably not a great deal, and there is no plan B here.
Is it possible a human has already been infected?
Yeah, it might.
Why are members saying they were trying to grab the money?
Because it's a smear campaign.
Get behind the car, behind the car.
Right now, it's hard to believe in the American dream.
I work for a better Australia for all of us.
7:30 tonight, ABC TV and ABC iView.
You are in at the beginning of something amazing.
3 much-loved shows are now on iView.
I must say, it does seem like fun.
Every episode of every season, all 3 from start to finish.
What's the catch?
There's no catch.
Fancy him, do you?
I am honoured.
Beauty, quality, elegance.
It's good to see you.
Stream them now on iView. It's the show that's got
solid gold
and real star power.
Are you saying there might one day be a Miff Warhurst laneway?
Where the bins are, yeah.
Marsha Hines brings the vocals.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
There's the weirdest instrument you've ever heard.
We met in the Star Wars meet and greet.
What is going on?
And a sign-off like no other.
Kate Sobrano is going to play a medley of Oz rock classics.
Spicks and Specs, Sunday 7:30 on ABC and ABC iView. A new era is here in stunning high definition on ABC News Channel and ABC Entertains. All your favourite shows and Australia's trusted news sharper and clearer than ever. Some TVs will update automatically. Others may require a manual retune. Standard definition TVs won't be compatible and you may require a digital set-top box or stream live TV on ABC iView anytime. For all the details, head to abc.net.au/HD change.
You're with ABC News. It's 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Continuing our breaking news coverage, the US President has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which will come into effect in the coming hours. Donald Trump praised the two countries for having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end the war. We'll have the latest on this rapidly evolving situation in just a moment. The major development comes after Iran launched a retaliatory attack on America's largest airbase in the Middle East. 14 missiles were fired at the Al Udeid facility in Qatar, but most were intercepted and the base had been evacuated. The volatile situation in the Middle East is causing global flight chaos, with airlines diverting traffic around the region. Qatar's airspace has now been reopened, but the knock-on effects are expected to last for days. And while we've had those two major developments in the Middle East, NATO leaders are preparing to gather in Brussels for this week's summit. Russia has launched another deadly air attack on Ukraine overnight. And all of these major world events are impacting markets, with Australian shares about to start trading. We'll get a sense of how stocks across different sectors are being affected, particularly the price of oil. It's Tuesday, the 24th of June. I'm Melissa McKay. This is ABC News Mornings. The US President Donald Trump says Iran and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. Mr. Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that there will be a complete and total ceasefire, which will be phased in over 24 hours, at which point he says the war will be considered ended. He's congratulated both countries for having what he says is the stamina, courage and intelligence to end the 12-day war. There's been no official confirmation of the truce from Israeli or Iranian leaders. Some media outlets, including Reuters, have cited Iranian officials as saying Tehran has agreed to the deal, but the government has not confirmed these reports. Hours earlier, Iran retaliated to the US bombing of its nuclear sites by launching missiles at American bases in Qatar. People in Doha witnessed a series of explosions and flashes in the sky as air defence systems intercepted the projectiles. There have been no reports of casualties. Several Gulf states temporarily closed their airspace as a precaution. Qatar has condemned Iran's strike.
This attack represents a blatant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar and a contradiction to the principles of good neighbourliness, and represents an aggression on international legitimacy and international law. And the state of Qatar confirms that it holds the right of response in accordance with the international laws and in accordance with the shape and size of this attack.
The Al-Udeid Air Base serves as a main regional military hub for American forces and is located about 30 kilometres southwest of Doha. Despite widespread criticism for its retaliatory strikes, there were celebrations on the streets of Tehran.
We will die, but we will never accept humiliation, and we will stand our ground here. We are not afraid of bombings, missiles, or anything else. We are defending our land.
We must definitely respond more, because the less we answer them, the bolder they become. We need to strike back harder and more decisively, so they finally understand their place.
A woman has told Iranian media that her home on the third floor of a building was hit after Israel completed what it called the most extensive wave of attacks it's ever carried out in Tehran. It also struck a prison which houses many political and foreign detainees, extending strikes beyond military and nuclear targets. In Israel, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been surveying damage to areas hit by Iranian missiles. Whether the ceasefire takes effect and holds remains to be seen.
This war will end when our objectives, those two main key objectives, are met. That ballistic missile program that reaches us here in Israel, but has the capacity to reach much further afield, much further afield, and also that nuclear weapons program. There is no scenario where Iran can have a nuclear weapon.
Let's bring in our Americas editor, John Lyons, now, who joins us from Washington, DC. John, this is all moving very quickly. Can you just take us through the developments over the last few hours, where we've started and how we've landed here?
Well, yes, Melissa, we're coming to you live from Washington, DC, where President Trump has announced that he's brokered a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. That news emerged a short time ago. It follows a dramatic day during which Iran fired at the major US military base in Doha. However, it was very much an attack which appeared to be going through the motions, and the evidence for that is that Iran actually warned Qatar and the United States that they were going to make this attack on the US military base. It appears that Iran did not want there to be any US casualties, and it appears that Iran did this for internal consumption, political reasons. The Supreme Leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, was needed to be seen to be taking some sort of retaliation for the dramatic weekend attacks by the United States, where President Trump ordered that B-2 stealth bombers drop 14 bunker buster bombs on Iran's three main nuclear sites, and the Iranian regime clearly felt it needed to respond to that. It responded today. President Trump quickly issued a statement on Truth Social saying that the response was weak, but he then went on to thank Iran for warning. In other words, thanks for the heads up that we're about to attack your own military base in Doha. Can you make sure nobody's there? In effect, Donald Trump then, the Americans then went ahead and made sure that there were no Americans who could be killed. And within hours of that, President Trump has announced a ceasefire, and he has said that that will come in within about 6 hours, which is about 4 hours from now, and that he has thanked both Israel and Iran for the work they have done, for having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war. Now, that statement alone will outrage the Israelis, absolutely outrage them, that the President of the United States is thanking Iran as well as the Israelis for their stamina, courage and intelligence. He then goes on to say that it's a war that could have gone on for years. In other words, you know, the subtext there is that he brought this to a quick end, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel, God bless Iran, God bless the Middle East, God bless the United States of America, and God bless the world. So the breaking news is that President Trump has brokered a ceasefire to the Iran-Israel war.
John, have we heard yet from Iran or Israel about this ceasefire and how these negotiations may have come about?
We don't know that for sure, but from what has been said on the public record, it's clear that the Israelis would not have wanted this. Their spokesman said just before, we heard him say that Israel would not stop this war until Iran's ballistic missile system had been destroyed and its nuclear program had been destroyed. Now, the ballistic missile program in Iran has not been destroyed. By definition, they continue to be firing ballistic missiles into Israel. So, in other words, that's proof that the Israelis, that the leverage from Donald Trump forced the Israelis to end this war before they wanted to. As to the nuclear program, we don't know whether that's been destroyed. There's question marks about that. On the other hand, the Iranians are in the weakest, most vulnerable state they've been since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. Their major proxy, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, has been defanged. And basically, Iran always relied on Hezbollah. It has 120,000 missiles it had south of the Litani River in Lebanon that were all pointed in towards Israel. We know over the last year Israel's essentially destroyed Hezbollah. It's essentially destroyed Hamas. The Houthis have been largely weakened. The Revolutionary Guard commanders in Tehran have been killed in the last week. So the Israelis wanted to prosecute this war as far as they could while Iran was so weak. So it's interesting that the US president is the one who has clearly strong-armed the Israelis into this deal.
Yeah, as you've touched on there, John, Donald Trump clearly placing himself at the centre of these negotiations. How is that being received domestically in the United States?
I think this is seen as a major victory for Donald Trump, and while there are many criticisms of Donald Trump, he has brought an end to this war, and when he says it could have gone on for years, he's quite right about that. While the Iranians have been weakened, the Revolutionary Guard, which underpins the whole regime in Iran, underpins the Supreme Leader's strength and his power, they are still have significant assets. And they could have fought and probably would have fought this for a lot longer. And so I think that, you know, what it says is that inside America, Donald Trump is seen by his base who didn't want America to get involved in another foreign war, that he's gone in there clinically, surgically, dropped those bunker buster bombs on the nuclear sites. There is not much sympathy in the United States for the regime in Iran. They see it as an extreme fundamentalist Islamist regime, and so there's little sympathy. Had the Americans sent ground troops in there, I think the American base, Donald Trump's base, would have reacted badly. So I think for him, he's been taking lots of hits on tariffs and the economy. That has alienated a lot of his base, but on things like deportation, the border, and now what he's done with Iran, I think are all seen as political winners for him. So he is seen on this as having been strong and decisive.
All right, our America's editor John Lyons in Washington, D.C. there for us. Thank you. Well, Middle East correspondent Alison Horn is standing by in Tel Aviv for us now. Hi there, Ali. Just take us through what you're hearing on the ground in the Middle East there.
Well, Mel, we're not hearing a lot, to be honest. It is about 3 a.m, just past 3 a.m. here in Israel, 3:30 in Iran, so it is very early in the morning. This news will be filtering through as people are waking up, but I think it is quite telling that we actually haven't heard anything from Israeli officials yet. I have put questions to the government and to those officials. The only group that has responded to me has been the Israeli military, the IDF, which has said that I needed to put these questions to the political echelons, which I have. So we are still waiting to hear of any confirmation or denial of this ceasefire. I've been monitoring Hebrew media, which is usually really quite tapped in to the inner negotiations around issues like this. They get a lot of internal leaks and information. There is nothing that is appearing at the moment on Hebrew media to support Donald Trump's claims of a ceasefire. from Iran. We're still waiting to hear as well from any official source there. Reuters is reporting that they have spoken with one senior official that has confirmed that this ceasefire is legitimate. The claim by Donald Trump saying that it actually was the Qataris that helped broker this deal. Now, that's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, because Qatar was the Gulf state where Iran launched its missiles just a few hours ago, targeting that US Army base. And secondly, Qatar has actually held a really strong role in the last 20-odd months of trying to negotiate another ceasefire, the ceasefire in Gaza, which hasn't come to fruition yet, a permanent ceasefire there. So it's not that surprising that Qatar has been involved in any behind-the-scene negotiations towards a ceasefire. But as I say, Mel, we still have no official confirmation from either here in Israel or in Tehran that this ceasefire will go ahead.
If this ceasefire is to go ahead, Ali, how do you expect it will be received by Iranians and Israelis?
Well, people I've been speaking with in Israel over the last few days, at the moment, they don't really have an appetite to be involved in another war. They're already involved in a conflict in Gaza. They've been fighting on the fronts in Lebanon. They've been fighting against the Houthis in Yemen, militias in Iraq, and now a full-blown war with Iran as well. So the appetite for continued conflict here is, on one sense, quite low, but there also has been incredible support for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in launching these attacks into Iran. I haven't come across a single person in Israel that has said that they don't support the Prime Minister launching these attacks into Iran. Now, that's not to say that that sentiment isn't flowing throughout the community, but it's definitely not the prevailing one. The prevailing sentiment is widespread support, and you can see that through the political polls as well. They have jumped for the Prime Minister's party to some of the highest levels that have been seen for him in quite some time. But I do think that it was becoming more and more obvious that if this war was going to continue, it would become a long and protracted one. And Israelis were starting to feel the human cost of that. They had had more than about 24 people had been killed here, and it was a constant disruption to the economy and people's lives in a scenario where they're already living through other conflicts. From the Iranian side, I will just preface this by saying it's really difficult for us to get information from the ground there. There are a number of obstructions, notably foreign media like myself are heavily restricted from actually going in there. It's very rare for a foreign journalist to get access into Iran. Secondly, the media inside there is tightly controlled. It's mainly state and state-run media. And thirdly, trying to talk to people on the ground is physically and metaphorically quite difficult, because there are rolling internet blackouts and social media blackouts. That means we can't actually get in touch with people. On top of that, a lot of people within Iran who are wanting to speak out against the regime are being targeted. They have the threat of arrest, detention, torture, and even death upon them if they speak to Western journalists like myself or express any anti-regime sentiment. So for all of those reasons, it is incredibly difficult to get information from on the ground of what's happening there. I do have a number of contacts in Iran that I've been speaking with over the last couple of weeks. They have been telling me that they also don't have an appetite for war. There is no appetite to have Iran at war. But there has been a certain groundswell within Iran about this idea of regime change. And I'm not saying that there aren't people within Iran who support the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. There definitely are large groups of people there that do. But there is also a massive number of people, tens of millions of people within Iran who do not support the Ayatollah. They do not support the theocratic Islamic regime there, and they wanted regime change, and they saw this moment in time as an opportunity for the Ayatollah's regime to tumble and a new era to be brought forth into Iran. People that I have been speaking with have told me that if this war came to an end without any change in the regime there, they feared that it would become even more oppressive, in their words, inside of Iran. They have told me they fear that because Iran has been weakened, it's been pounded by Israel, its nuclear sites have been heavily damaged, its arsenal has been heavily depleted, and from an optics perspective, it's also been weak. It's also been weakened. And so these people are saying they feel that because the Ayatollah regime is on shaky ground at the moment from external forces, internally, that'll result in a crackdown on anti-regime supporters and even more harsh measures around trying to suppress anti-regime sentiment, putting up more checkpoints, more people having their phones checked, more people being arrested and possibly even killed. So I put in some calls and some messages to my contacts in Iran since this news has broke. I haven't heard back from them yet. They may be asleep or they may actually just be out of internet contact, but as this morning progresses, I am hoping that we'll hear more from them as to what they think this is going to mean for the future.
And Ali, before we let you go, have there been any reports in the last couple of hours of any further strikes, as we know that there often can be in the lead up to a ceasefire if one is to take hold?
Yeah, we've had 3 warnings that have been put out by Israel's military for 3 different areas within Tehran, calling for people to evacuate from those areas, foreshadowing that the military will be conducting airstrikes in Tehran. We are hearing reports from within Iran of masses of explosions. I would say, Mel, that judging on other conflicts in this area, the hours leading up to a ceasefire, particularly what we've seen in Gaza, for example, are often some of the most dangerous and deadly. Masses of airstrikes, masses of bombs, and what we've seen in Gaza is masses of civilian casualties. We are hearing that there are ongoing Israeli strikes at the moment inside Iran. I will say, interestingly, here in Israel, we haven't had a massive barrage of Iranian rockets from Tel Aviv, here in Tel Aviv, for quite some hours. There were a few drones that were spotted in the north of the country about an hour ago. So, look, I don't know how the next few hours are going to play out, but I think there is a high possibility that there's going to be a fierce retaliation from Iran, and there's going to be continuing bombardment within Iran as well by Israel.
All right, Middle East correspondent Alison Horn there in Tel Aviv for us. Thank you. Well, back home, the Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has welcomed the US President's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Political reporter Nicole Hegarty has more.
So we heard earlier today both the government and the opposition condemning the strikes by Iran on Qatar, on the US airbase in Qatar. Then, a short time ago, we have received a statement from the Prime Minister in response to this reported ceasefire that President Trump has referenced on his Truth social media platform. That statement, just reading that, it says that Anthony Albanese in that statement says that Australia welcomes the President's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and again reiterates his government has consistently called for dialogue, diplomacy and de-escalation. He says the safety of Australians in the region is the government's priority, saying they continue to closely monitor developments and are deeply concerned about keeping Australians safe in the region, and they are continuing to closely monitor that as well. So that's the latest update we've heard following on from President Donald Trump's comments on social media that a ceasefire has been secured and will come into effect in the coming hours, Mel.
And Nicole, what is the latest for Australians trying to leave the region?
We're yet to hear an update post both the strikes overnight and also the reports of a ceasefire, but we have seen that the numbers have continued to grow over the recent days. That number of Australians and their family members looking to leave the region, so collectively Israel and Iran, is now in excess of 4,000. So over 4,000 people looking for assistance from the Department of Foreign Affairs to leave the area. A previous attempt last night to get some of those in Israel out of the region by a repatriation flight was cancelled amid further strikes from Iran on Israel. As I say, we haven't heard any more since this news of a ceasefire, but we have seen that the US, the State Department, has reported that 7 flights have departed Israel carrying some 250 US citizens and family members out of Israel, so that the US has been able to facilitate some repatriation flights. But as to when Australia will be able to do likewise, we wait and see.
All right, Nicole Haggerty there for us in Canberra. Thank you. The closure of airspace in Doha has left many Aussies stranded after their flights were cancelled. 4 flights were due to leave Doha for Australia, bound for Adelaide, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne. Reporter Kate Mead is at Melbourne Airport for us this morning. Hi there, Kate. What have you heard from people there?
And what I would say to you is, as this situation keeps changing throughout the day, for passengers, anyone that is flying to the Middle East either today or in the next couple of days are being advised to check in with their airlines and keep up to date with what is going on with their flights. It does keep changing. The current information that I actually just have received is that out of Melbourne to Dubai, those flights have been cancelled for the next 24 hours. So that's what I'm hearing just within the last 15-20 minutes or go. So Qatar's major international airport has reopened its airspace for dozens of flights. However, it is impacting flights coming in from all over the world. There were flights earlier this morning at around 4 a.m. Some of those got delayed due to passengers wishing to get off the plane. But they were able to take off. That was about 4 o'clock this morning. Qantas has released a statement that is the most recent one from an airline that I have. It says that due to airspace closures and congestion through the Middle East resulting in air traffic restrictions, QF9 Perth to London has been diverted to Singapore, and QF33 Perth to Paris is returning to Perth. They will continue to monitor airspace availability closely and will alter their schedule as required. They're thanking their customers for patience and understanding. Now, just for a little bit of background as well, the flight that has been diverted to Singapore, they have 199 customers and 19 crew. They're going to be staying in Singapore. And the flight that is returning to Perth has 216 passengers and 14 crew, and they will be staying in Perth. So there are disruptions happening all over Australia while this unfolds. So again, it is that reminder to check in with your airline. Earlier this morning, I was able to catch up with some passengers that arrived here at the Melbourne International Airport. They had been in Dubai, they'd been on their 20-hour flight, and I was curious to know a little bit about how they were feeling at the airport, what did it look like. Here's a little of what they had to tell me this morning. Was there an increased security or were there more warnings? Tell me what you saw.
More security. There was a lot more people around that were assisting and directing, and yeah, there's quite a few people there.
Did become a bit of a worry that we were a bit concerned and that we hadn't heard anything. So obviously we were a little bit dubious getting into Dubai. I did notice when we were flying into Dubai, I was so much more aware of where we were flying over. I was looking through the window anxiously to see if I could see anything or if there were any warning signs that I should worry about. But yeah, it was mainly from home that we heard the news. There wasn't a lot of telecast.
So once again, that reminder is that anyone travelling to the Middle East today needs to check in with their airlines to see what the update is with their flights. This situation will be changing and we will keep you up to date as that information comes available.
All right, Kate Mead there reporting from Melbourne Airport for us. Thank you. Well, let's bring in former Middle East correspondent Nicole Johnston, who's been covering the region and lived in Qatar for a decade. She joins me now. Hi there, Nicole. Could you just, I guess, give us your analysis of the situation so far this morning? Does this sound like a ceasefire is likely to take hold?
Well, according to President Trump, that is exactly what's going to happen. It's a ceasefire and the end of a war. But it does sound a little bit too tidy right now for it to be as clear-cut as that. This is a staggered ceasefire. It's going to take effect over a number of hours, a 6-hour, a 12-hour, a 24. The period leading up to the end of any war is dangerous and complicated. We know that there is a heavy bombardment underway at the moment in Tehran. Both sides will be trying to make the most of these final hours to hit targets, to put forward their message. So, of course, anything could go wrong. We still haven't heard from the Iranians officially or from the Israelis, but certainly President Trump is making it sound as though it is all over. But until the guns fall silent, I think we should be careful and just watch and see how it all plays out.
Yeah, just how orchestrated does this all sound to you?
Completely orchestrated. What a turn of events over the last few hours. And we are getting some reports that Qatari officials were in on the whole thing. I would say the Qataris, the Iranians, the Israelis, Saudi Arabia, possibly the entire GCC countries, because it is an extraordinary development for Iran to fire missiles across the Strait of Hormuz, that incredibly important waterway that 20% of the world's oil supply flies through, and hit an allied country, essentially. Qatar and Iran have a good relationship. They share a natural gas reserve. So really something that for me was quite shocking to see the Iranians take that step. But it had, I'm sure, all been orchestrated by the US. President Trump has indicated that anyhow, and perhaps that was the only way for this to come about. The Iranians needed to have a significant target to save face domestically, to show strength after the attacks on their nuclear facilities. They would have looked around the Gulf, looked around the Middle East, trying to think about where they could hit. There would have been back-channel negotiations and talks going on with the Omanis and with the Qataris to decide on a target. And what a target they went for. They went for the US's biggest air base, military base in the Middle East, the Al Ubaid base. But the Americans were prepared for it. The Qataris were prepared. The US, over the last few days, had sent 40 aircraft out of Al Ubaid. So, yes, a well-orchestrated potential end to this war, but let's wait and see.
Yes, of course, there is still quite a bit up in the air. What do you think happens next?
Well, that is the big question, because even if this is the end of the war, what about Iran's nuclear program? I still find it difficult to believe that Iran would ever agree to have zero nuclear enrichment. That has been a red line for this regime. Once the war is over, if that actually happens, they will have to go back to talks and negotiations. The Europeans may get back involved, and there needs to be a nuclear deal that will satisfy the Iranians and satisfy the Israelis. The Israelis have made it very clear that nothing will satisfy them other than the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear program. But we know that the Iranians have been shipping some of their enriched uranium to other sites around the country. We don't know how damaged their nuclear sites are. They still have the ability and the background and the intelligence to resurrect that program over the next few years if they choose to. Analysts are saying that it has been knocked back a few years, but I would imagine the Iranians, if they want to get it up and running again, they will.
And Nicole, can you just give us a bit of an idea of what the relationship between Iran and Qatar usually is in a normal situation?
That's what's so interesting, as I just said, about this strike. These two countries, they share a natural gas field, one of the biggest ones in the world. And a few years ago, when Saudi Arabia and a number of Gulf Arab countries imposed an air, sea and land blockade on Qatar for over 3 years, that happened in 2017, who came to the Qataris' rescue? Who came to their aid? It was only the Iranians and the Turks. So these two countries do have a strong relationship. So that's what makes it pretty clear to everyone that Qatar decided to intervene, as it does, as a major regional negotiator and mediator, and said they would take the hit, and it's all been orchestrated. And from the perspective of the US, it looks quite tidy, but it's hard to see it playing out as clean and clear-cut as that at this stage. I mean, the next few hours will be telling.
Absolutely. All right, Nicole Johnston, their former Middle East correspondent, thank you so much for your analysis and insights this morning. Well, Amelia Terzon is here now with your business news.
Well, financial markets appear to be tentatively celebrating the latest developments in the Middle East. Many commentators have been noting that overall markets have been relatively calm the last week despite the conflict escalating. For more on what we can expect today, I'm joined by Daniel Hines from the bank ANZ. Thank you for joining me, Daniel. It's a very interesting week to be a commodities analyst. How do you expect we're going to see the latest market reaction to US President Donald Trump now saying that Iran and Israel have reached a ceasefire?
Yeah, well, certainly the initial reaction from commodity markets and oil in particular has been one of calm, and we've seen prices pull back as a consequence. I think actually leading up to these latest events, there was, though, still a little bit of, I suppose, caution around, this escalating to that potential worst-case scenario. The market, being disrupted through the Strait of Hormuz in particular. I think, investors were probably not pricing in the true sort of risk that entailed. Under the sort of the idea that this won't escalate, and clearly at this point in time it appears to be tracking that way. But certainly, the geopolitical sort of tensions still remain relatively elevated, and we do hold the view, I suppose, that there's still a potential risk for supply disruptions down the track. I don't think oil prices will completely wipe out the gains that we've seen since Friday's attack on Iran by Israel. But certainly there is a lot more measure of calm that things haven't really escalated to that worst case scenario.
Daniel, you was just noting there's been a bit of commentary that in the grand scheme of things, markets have been pretty stable the last few days as this has escalated. Stocks haven't been diving, oil didn't massively spike, and gold is tracking along. Do you think the market is basically sick of reacting?
In a sense, yes. I mean, when you look back at the world's sort of major geopolitical events, particularly the ones centred around the Middle East, we've seen a diminishing sort of impact on the oil market, on supply disruptions, and subsequently the oil price. And I think, it's come to a point now where markets, view, I suppose, these or take these types of issues, with a little bit of a grain of salt, considering the impact we've seen in previous examples hasn't been that great. So, there's certainly a view that, we're not, or the markets aren't going to price in that worst-case scenario too early. And, clearly that appears to be the case this time around.
And Daniel, as you've noted, oil prices are coming down now, but that was actually happening even before this ceasefire news. Do you think that financial markets were basically betting that Iran was trying to de-escalate the conflict and also potentially that its threat to block a key shipping route, the Strait of Hormuz, was actually an empty threat?
Well, essentially, yes. And I think, when you look at, the actors in particular, I mean, certainly Iran, from sort of the oil market's view, has been severely diminished, at least its military capabilities and those of its sort of proxy militant groups around the region due to, Israel's sort of efforts over the past couple of years. So the market certainly was taking a view that, even if it did retaliate, it wouldn't be as significant as potentially it could have been if they were essentially, at full power. And I think, markets sort of bet on that type of outcome appears to be paying off at this stage.
Well, markets don't always get it right. We also had US President Donald Trump call on American companies to drill for more oil and gas. Do you think he was actually genuinely spooked by the price of higher energy prospects for his citizens?
No, absolutely. I think that's been a concern of his for some time. He talked about it, soon after the election, and he called on OPEC and Saudi Arabia in particular to keep prices relatively low. It's always been a political minefield, and so the consequence of the US joining this conflict did obviously run that risk of higher energy prices. His request to drill baby drill essentially and to boost US output, though, I think will fall on deaf ears. We've seen, I suppose, a decline in drilling activity in the industry for some time now, and I think the uncertainty that the US-China trade war has brought also has kept a lot of those producers from really reinvesting a lot of their capital back into those wells. So I suspect US output is going to hold relatively stable, potentially even fall, despite the calls from the president to boost output.
Daniel, thank you very much for your time this morning.
My pleasure.
And let's just take a quick look at the numbers that Daniel was just talking us through. As you can see, we've got Brent crude, which is oil, coming down. It's off around 7% as the situation has been de-escalating. And gold is also slightly down. And the Australian dollar has rebounded. Analysts are predicting it'll rise today as those conflict risks ease off. And American stocks were rising even before US President Donald Trump announced that ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Futures are now pointing towards more optimism on Wall Street. And we've just had markets open here in Australia. So far, investors also optimistic about the latest news. Energy stocks like Beach and Viva have been dropping as those oil prices are pulling back. And in other finance news, the airline Virgin is being relisted on the Australian share market today, 5 years after it went broke during the pandemic. The company's stock is debuting today at $2.90 a share. This values the company at less than $3 billion, which is just a fraction of its nearest rival Qantas, which is valued at $15 billion. Virgin is relisting on the ASX as the administrators of Rex keep trying to find a buyer for that failed airline. The consumer watchdog has been warning that competition is decreasing here in Australia in the domestic flights market. And that's finance so far. We'll keep you updated as trading continues.
This is ABC News. I'm Melissa McKay. These are the top stories we're following this morning. US President Donald Trump says a ceasefire between Israel and Iran will come into effect in the coming hours. He's congratulated the two countries on having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end what he's calling the 12-day war. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has welcomed the announcement. He says the situation is being closely monitored and the safety of Australians in the region remains a priority. President Trump's announcement came hours after Iran launched missiles at a US military base in Qatar. Officials say the attack was successfully intercepted and no one was injured, as the base had been evacuated earlier in the day. President Trump labelled the retaliatory attack a very weak response. Qatar Airways says flights are resuming as the country reopens its airspace, but disruptions are expected to continue for days. Dubai, Kuwait and Bahrain also briefly suspended flights. Qantas and Virgin Australia have diverted flights away from the region, with Australians travelling overseas urged to stay in contact with their airlines. The developments in the Middle East come as leaders prepare to gather in Brussels for this week's NATO summit. The leader of NATO says allies must up their defence spending to deter Russia after Moscow launched yet another deadly attack on the Ukrainian capital. More than 350 drones and missiles were fired, killing at least 9 people in and around Kyiv. The leader of the NATO alliance says the focus of this week's summit will be the war in Ukraine after the country's capital came under attack from Russian forces again. Ukrainian officials say at least 7 people have been killed and several apartment buildings damaged after Russia launched more than 350 drones and missiles. But there's concern developments in the Middle East could overshadow the NATO summit. Europe correspondent Elias Kluwer is in The Hague.
Kyiv under attack yet again. This Russian airstrike began in the dead of night with that terrifying buzz of drones being heard across the city. People made their way to various bomb shelters across the Ukrainian capital, but tragically at least 9 people have been killed. The Ukrainian military says it shot down at least 300 Russian drones, and the president of the country, Volodymyr Zelensky, spent Monday in the United Kingdom. First with the King at Windsor Castle, then the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, where he said he'd discuss once again imposing more sanctions on Moscow. Now, here in The Hague, the Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has said that he's hoping this week's summit can see the alliance's countries agree on a 5% of GDP minimum defence spend. He says a majority of that new defence investment will go towards deterring Russia and protecting Ukraine.
But let me give you a few examples of what we will invest in. A 5-fold increase in air defence capabilities, because we see Russia's deadly terror from the skies over Ukraine every day, and we must be able to defend ourselves from such attacks.
The NATO Secretary-General says Russia remains the alliance's most direct and significant threat and will be the primary focus of this week's summit. But the presence of Donald Trump and a new war in the Middle East may see that get top billing.
Elias Kluwer reporting there. We're returning to the developing news out of the Middle East now, where US President Donald Trump says a ceasefire between Israel and Iran will come into effect in the coming hours. The president has congratulated the two countries on having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end what he's calling the 12-day war. Planet America co-host John Barron joins me now for more on this. Hi there, John. So what's been the reaction in the US to President Trump's announcement of a ceasefire?
Mel, good morning. So far, it's been predictable, I suppose. Trump's Republican allies have been full of praise for the president's decision to first go in with those bunker-busting bombs against the Iranian nuclear facilities that Israel lacked the military capacity to obliterate, in the president's words. Also, Donald Trump's support base, which tends to be more isolationist than mainstream Republicans, which expressed some concerns in the last 48 hours that the president who promised to avoid World War III may have just started one, are starting to express relief, and that those like prominent conservative activists, including Charlie Kirk, who were effectively urging Trump supporters to have faith in his judgment that he would not be entering into another decades-long war in the Middle East, but helping Israel to strike a decisive blow against their main adversary, they're now claiming that they're vindicated, as is Donald Trump, in taking this action. Meanwhile, on the other side of politics, it's a very different sort of a response so far, scepticism as to whether this ceasefire that Donald Trump announced can in fact hold, and whether in fact this will be an ongoing military operation, perhaps just at a lower level, at a more clandestine level, at a cyber level, and a special forces level, because at the end of the day, with possibly many hundreds and hundreds of kilograms of highly enriched uranium ready to be turned into nuclear devices, Iran still has the centrifuges and still has the uranium to make a bomb. So there is a wide range of reaction that we're hearing so far, Mel.
How central to these ceasefire negotiations do you think the United States was? Can you just explain to us how much power does the US have here?
Well, certainly the use of those B-2 stealth bombers on the weekend and those bunker-busting bombs, which went into Iran, we believe, according to the Defence Secretary Hegseth, undetected by Iranian radar. Not only does Iran not have the capacity to shoot them down, at 2 o'clock in the morning, they did not know they were there, even though they had been anticipating that there would be US and Israeli strikes at Fordow, at Natanz and Isfahan. So the very fact that America was able to project that military strength, carrying with it, in the president's words, the threat of plenty more to come, because Israel in the previous week or so had done so much to devastate the Iranian missile and air defence systems, that this was an almost unchecked attack. So Iran, very, very badly weakened. Its weakness was exposed. It was unable to defend its own nuclear program, which, according to analysts, had been brought to the brink of possibly weeks away from having the highly enriched 90% enriched uranium required for a nuclear device, and possibly just a few months from being able to weaponize that. So there are many independent observers who are now concurring and saying that while they would never advocate war, both Israel and the United States were essentially telling us the truth, that Iran was getting very close. Whether Iran was actually going to take that step over the line, a line they've been very close to for the last 20 years, is still anyone's guess.
Do we know yet, John, just how much of an impact those US strikes have had on Iran's nuclear facilities?
Speaking this morning, Mel, to one of America's top weapons experts, Dr. David Albright, who was heavily involved in the monitoring of the Iraqi nuclear program in the 1990s and subsequently the Iranian efforts, his belief is that significant damage, if not obliteration in the president's words, significant damage has been done. If you look at the satellite images above the Fordow, deep underground in a mountainside, that the bunker-busting bombs not only penetrated the points of vulnerability, including the ventilation shaft, which, as you can imagine, if it's a bit like a big lift shaft, if you send a massive bomb down there, it's a real shortcut to causing massive destruction once it gets to the halls below where this highly enriched uranium was being purified up to that 60% level. So it does appear as though, even though to the untrained eye, we look at satellite images and say, well, there was a mountain there before, there's a mountain there now, there's maybe a couple of divots in it and a few potholes. Well, those potholes apparently, to the experts, tell a story. That being said, they also warn that Iran still has the potential to break out and generate a nuclear weapon. And the question is, do they want to do that now, or do they see, having had their weakness exposed in the last couple of weeks, that is not the best option for either the Iranian people or indeed the survival of the Iranian regime of the Ayatollahs?
Planet America co-host John Barron there for us. Thank you. Counterinsurgency expert and former Bush administration advisor David Kilcullen says Iran's strike on the US airbase in Al Udeid was largely a show of its missile capabilities.
I think many people are surprised by the performative nature of the Iranian strike on Al Udeid airbase. I'm not actually surprised by that. That's very similar to what they did after Qasem Soleimani was killed, an attempt to, if you like, demonstrate to their own population that they are retaliating for the strikes, but not result in a further escalation with the United States or Israel when the Iranian regime is in a fairly shaky regional position. I think that, as one of your correspondents mentioned, this is the weakest that the regime has been in decades, but it's not at all weak at home, and I don't think there's any prospect of the regime falling over. So what you're seeing here is, as you often see from the regime in Tehran, prioritization of regime survival over every other factor. So they, seem to be accepting the loss of some portion of their nuclear program as the price for preserving the regime itself.
Overnight, it did seem as though Israel was pretty set on seeing a regime change in Iran. Why would it now agree to a ceasefire if it has?
Yeah, that's a good question. And the answer to that is we don't know, right? I mean, we don't know if they've agreed to a ceasefire. And I would be surprised if they accept a ceasefire without first making their best attempt to fully destroy the Iranian nuclear program, which obviously they started that effort about 11 days ago. So, and again, as I said, the key missing piece is the enriched uranium, which is, after all, the cause of the conflict in the first place and remains unaccounted for. But right before the US strikes on Fordow, there were convoys of trucks turning up to the site, and one theory is that they were actually evacuating parts of that stockpile. It's also worth noting that there were unexplained movements of a very large number of Chinese cargo aircraft into Iranian airspace immediately prior to the strikes. So it's quite possible that the Iranians have sought to safeguard or maintain possession of that highly enriched uranium, which would then mean that the whole war might have been this might be a temporary ceasefire in something that turns out to be a larger and longer-term confrontation.
Israel had expanded its attacks in Iran. Overnight, we saw it hit the Evin prison. Can you just take us through what Israel's intentions in this war with Iran have been?
So Israel has been extraordinarily victorious militarily over the last 6 months. We've seen the fall of the Syrian regime of Bashar al-Assad. We've seen Hezbollah in Lebanon very seriously degraded. We've seen Israeli troops now occupying decisive terrain, the summit of Mount Hermon, which sits on the three-way border between Syria, Israel, and Lebanon. We've seen them moving into areas of Syria that they've never occupied before, with Israeli tanks only about 20 kilometres from Damascus in Syria. So really extraordinary military success on the part of the Israelis in the last 6 months. But at the same time, international public opinion has been some of the most negative that Israel's ever experienced, with sanctions being talked about and multiple traditional friends of Israel turning against at least the Netanyahu government, not necessarily the state of Israel. So Israel needed to flip the script and to transform the war from being, if you like, big Israel against little Gaza to being little Israel against big Iran. And Iran is much bigger than Israel by almost every measure, including its military budget. So I think this has been a political move to try to flip the script and change the international perception of the war. And a key part of that is wiping out what Israel has long regarded as an existential threat, which is the alleged Iranian nuclear program. So I think what we're seeing here is an attempt to take advantage of a positive military situation in order to transform the political situation and remove this long-term threat against Israel.
That was military strategist David Kilcullen there. That's ABC News for now. There's more on the ABC News app and anytime on ABC iView. I'm Melissa McKay. Stay with us on the ABC News channel. I'll be back with more news in just a moment.
Walking with Dinosaurs continues tonight on ABC and ABC iView.
10 countries,
Dracula's castle.
endless stories.
You touch my heart so much. That's adorable.
Joanna Lumley's Danube, Thursday at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Everyone who witnessed a murder today, hands up. Too many suspects, not enough clues.
In Gratchester, even the innocent have something to hide.
You can't bottle that stuff up and avoid it forever.
Gratchester, Saturday on ABC and ABC iView.
On ABC iView, step inside the art, the stories and the people that dare to imagine more.
This is the home of bold and brilliant performances.
Give me more of that.
Stream it all for free on ABC iView, always creative. Across the UK, music comes to life.
I've been playing for 77 years.
Some will steal the spotlight.
Here we go.
Some will steal your heart.
Oh my God.
Stream the piano on ABC iView or Sunday on ABC Entertains.
I always thought that Jess was the perfect mother. Turns out being a perfect mother is impossible.
Could anyone have hurt Betsy?
You are not her friend. You are that baby's doctor.
Can you really know what she's capable of?
Little Disasters, Sunday on ABC and ABC iView.
The ABC Listen app is your Apple a day. Explore a wide range of health and well-being podcasts, like All in the Mind.
How old were you when you first realised that, you were different to other kids?
Download the ABC Listen app now.
You're with ABC News. It's 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The US President has announced a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, which will come into effect in the coming hours. Donald Trump praised the two countries for having the stamina, courage and intelligence to end the war. We'll have the latest on this rapidly evolving situation in a moment. The major development comes after Iran launched a retaliatory attack on America's largest airbase in the Middle East. 14 missiles were fired at the Al Udeid facility in Qatar, but most were intercepted and the base had been evacuated. In other news, Russia has launched another deadly air attack on Ukraine as NATO leaders prepare to gather in Brussels for this week's summit. Back home, the E-Safety Commissioner recommends YouTube be added to the planned social media ban for young people. And Virgin Australia returns to the Australian share market 5 years after the airline went broke during the pandemic. It's Tuesday, the 24th of June. I'm Melissa McKay. This is ABC News Mornings. US President Donald Trump says Iran and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire. Mr. Trump posted on his Truth Social platform that there will be a complete and total ceasefire, which will be phased in over 24 hours, at which point he says the war will be considered ended. He's congratulated both countries for having what he says is the stamina, courage and intelligence to end the 12-day war. There's been no official confirmation of the truce from Israeli or Iranian leaders. Media outlets are citing senior Iranian officials who say a decision will be made if Israel doesn't carry out any new attacks, while other reports say the Israeli Prime Minister approved the ceasefire in a phone call with Mr. Trump. Hours earlier, Iran retaliated to the US bombing of its nuclear sites by launching missiles at American bases in Qatar. People in Doha witnessed a series of explosions and flashes in the sky as air defence systems intercepted the projectiles. There have been no reports of casualties. Several Gulf states temporarily closed their airspace as a precaution. Qatar has condemned Iran's strike.
This attack represents a blatant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar and a contradiction to the principles of good neighbourliness, and represents an aggression on international legitimacy and international law. And the state of Qatar confirms that it holds the right of response in accordance with the international laws and in accordance with the shape and size of this attack.
The Al Udeid Air Base serves as a main regional military hub for American forces and is located about 30 kilometres southwest of Doha. Despite widespread criticism for its retaliatory strikes, there were celebrations on the streets of Tehran.
We will die, but we will never accept humiliation, and we will stand our ground here. We are not afraid of bombings, missiles, or anything else. We are defending our land.
We must definitely respond more, because the less we answer them, the bolder they become. We need to strike back harder and more decisively, so they finally understand their place.
A woman has told Iranian media that her home on the third floor of a building was hit after Israel completed what it called the most extensive wave of attacks it's ever carried out in Tehran. It also struck a prison which houses many political and foreign detainees, extending strikes beyond military and nuclear targets. In Israel, the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been surveying damage to areas hit by Iranian missiles. Whether the ceasefire takes effect and holds remains to be seen.
This war will end when our objectives, those two main key objectives, are met. That ballistic missile program that reaches us here in Israel, but has the capacity to reach much further afield, much further afield, and also that nuclear weapons program. There is no scenario where Iran can have a nuclear weapon.
In breaking news, the Iranian Foreign Minister says as of now there's no agreement on any ceasefire or cessation of military operations between Israel and Iran. But in a statement, the Foreign Minister said if Israel stops its illegal aggression against Iranians, then Tehran will not retaliate further. He said the final decision on the cessation of Iran's military operations will be made later. President Donald Trump earlier posted on social media that the Israel and Iran war was set to end in a ceasefire, holding out the reported deal as validation for his strategic gamble of ordering US airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites. Well, let's bring in research professor of Middle East and Central Asian politics at Deakin University, Shahram Akbarzadeh. He joins us live now from Melbourne. Good morning. This potential ceasefire between Israel and Iran has come about in the last few hours. Is that surprising to you?
Thanks for having me, Mel. Yes, it's very surprising because only a few hours ago, Iran launched a retaliatory attack on the US base in Qatar. And before that, President Trump was talking about regime change in Iran. Now, all of a sudden, Trump is talking about ceasefire. This is surprising, but it could be an opportunity for Iran to save face, because earlier Trump was asking Iran for an unconditional surrender. Now he's talking about a ceasefire and end to the conflict. So this could be an off-ramp for Iran to take and save face and not admit that it's been defeated.
We've just seen moments ago a statement from the Iranian Foreign Minister that no agreement has been made right at the moment. But what do you make of this possible ceasefire sort of coming about hours after the Iranian attacks on the US base in Qatar and from that statement from the Iranian Foreign Minister?
Well, as we speak, there are aerial attacks on Iran, and there are reports of explosions in Tehran and anti-air fire. So Iran feels that it continues to be under attack. From the Iranian point of view, given that Iran did not start the war, given that Israel launched the attack about 10 days ago to torpedo the discussions between Iran and the United States over Iran's nuclear program, from the Iranian point of view, an end to the conflict would be welcome, but Iran cannot admit that it's been defeated. So that's why we see the foreign minister from Iran saying the terms are not acceptable because the terms of the ceasefire actually asks Iran to stop firing against Israel and giving Israel about 6 hours or so before they stop firing. So the terms seems to favor Israel, and that's why the foreign minister is signaling that they wouldn't accept capitulation.
You've been watching Iranian TV this morning. It's still, of course, very early in the morning there, but how is this war being reported at the moment?
Well, the war is actually playing very much going according to the Iranian narrative of the United States being a global bully and a hegemon, trying to muscle its way into the Middle East and imposing its will on the people of the Middle East, especially the Iranian people. So the Iranian narrative of revolution, standing up against the United States, this narrative of resistance against Israel is being repeated over and over again. And that's how it's being depicted.
What do you think is happening behind the scenes? We've been hearing reports of back-channel negotiations taking place. What do you think is happening there?
Well, it's almost impossible to know what's happening behind the scene, but what I think is very certain is that from the Iranian perspective, this has hardened their resolve to pursue a hardline approach in relation to Israel and in relation to the United States, that there is little stock, they put little stock in negotiation and reform in relation to Iran's domestic or international policy. So I think this is probably a big blow to the reform movement in Iran. And we've already heard that Iran is contemplating exiting NPT, the non-nuclear non-proliferation treaty. And we have heard talks of Iran developing its own nuclear weapon. So there is now more incentive for Iran to actually turn towards a nuclear bomb. So this would be a big blow to the Israeli agenda and the US agenda, because they started this war to prevent Iran from building a nuclear bomb. And now Iranians are openly discussing it.
We had been seeing reports overnight of Israel widening its attacks beyond potential nuclear sites. What do you make of that approach?
Well, Israel is showing that it can hit any target it wishes to. It's a show of might. Israel has a commitment, effectively, to regime change in Iran, especially under Netanyahu's leadership. Israel sees the Iranian leadership as an existential threat. It has been pursuing that line, and I only expect that Israelis would continue pounding Iranian targets and undermining the regime's stability.
So where does this leave the Iranian regime at the moment, do you think?
Well, as I mentioned, I think we see a hardened resolve among the hardliners to resist, using their terminology, American pressure, Israeli pressure, perhaps explore the nuclear weapon option and exiting NPT. That's very sad for the Iranian population because there were hopes of reconciliation. The talks between Iran and the United States prior to the Israeli attack were raising hopes that Iran could come out of isolation and life could be returned to normal a bit. But now we have gone back.
Shahram Akbarzadeh from Deakin University there for us. Thanks so much for your insights this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And just repeating that breaking news there, Iran says there is currently no agreement on a ceasefire or cessation of military operations between Israel and Iran. Former Middle East correspondent Nicole Johnston is back with us now. Hi there, Nicole. So what do you make of this statement from the Iranian Foreign Minister?
Well, it's a really complicated picture, Mel, and we were just talking about how the lead up to the end of any war can get very difficult, especially with a ceasefire agreement like this that has multiple timelines. We hadn't heard from the Iranians or the Israelis until now. Let me just read out for you what we heard from the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araqchi, to try and give a bit more detail about it. He said, if Israel stops its illegal aggression against Iranians no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time, we have no intention to continue our response afterwards. So that does make it sound that if Israel stops firing, then the Iranians will stop firing. Now, it's 4:30 a.m. in Iran now. This message is so unclear. We don't know if he's talking about right now or 24 hours for now, because we know from President Trump's statement, this is a staggered ceasefire with a 6-hour mark, a 12-hour mark and a 24-hour mark. And then, as you were saying, he goes on to say the final cessation, the final decision on the cessation of our military operations will be made later. So it doesn't sound as though it's quite game over for Iran just yet. And I think they'd be trying to be quite careful about making it not sound as though this has all been stitched up by the United States, the Gulf states and the Israelis. The Iranians still have some skin in the game. They're now under heavy bombardment by the Israelis, and they want to continue to show strength. Whereas if it looks like President Trump has sort of handed over this neat, tidy package, it's all done and dusted, so to speak. I mean, that is not the message of regional power that the Iranians want to be projecting. So right now, it's a very unclear situation, and that's why we do need to be careful over the coming hours to see whether this ceasefire that President Trump has been that tweeted about a few hours ago, whether it is actually going to take effect.
Yes, it's all moving very quickly and developing quite rapidly. Nicole, just, I guess, explain to us what the significance is in this, in the context of what we were hearing from the US president just a few hours ago.
It starts to sound like a contradiction, doesn't it? That's the confusing picture for anybody who's watching and following what's going on. Are the Iranians on board or are they not on board? Are they saying, well, you stop fighting, then we'll stop fighting? In similar wars, for example, Gaza, the Israelis and Hamas, you often have this very vague situation in the lead up to it with an outside party, in this case the United States, likely the Qataris and the Omanis, coming up with an arrangement, thinking they have everybody on board. In some cases, putting the deal out there and just waiting for everybody to say, well, yes, we agree, because what other choice do they effectively have? So it's not that unusual that we would get this sort of mixed messaging in the lead up to the end of a war like this, but it does make it a difficult picture to try and follow.
It absolutely does. Nicole, before we let you go, can I get you just to take us through again that statement from the Iranian Foreign Minister and where we're at right now after this sort of back and forth?
Well, just to repeat a little bit of it, the Iranian Foreign Minister, Abbas Araqchi, the first time that we have heard from him since these strikes were carried out by the Iranians on Qatar, on the US Al Ubaid air base there, he has said if Israel stops its illegal aggression against Iranians no later than 4 a.m. Tehran time, we have no intention to continue our response. But he goes on to say the final decision on the cessation of our military operations will be made later. So it almost sounds as though this could be an interim ceasefire agreement, which there often is in war, a temporary deal to get both sides to stop firing, to put the guns and the missiles down, so to speak, while they work out further detail. Because, as we discussed before, Mel, the big issue here is Iran's nuclear program and its ballistic missile program. That is the issue for the Israelis. Even if, as President Trump says, there is an end to the fighting, that doesn't solve the big problem for Israel, which is that it regards the Iranians as an existential threat, and it will continue to be a threat in the Israeli narrative for as long as the Iranians have a nuclear program to some extent. It's obviously been seriously downgraded, and they have a ballistic missile program. So we know that the Europeans had been hoping or trying to come up with a much broader deal than a nuclear agreement, something that would limit the Iranians' missile program, an all-encompassing deal, one that would also end the financing of proxies and militias in the region that Iran has done. That is what the Europeans are after. Maybe there'll be an end to the fighting, as Trump hopes, and all sides will go back to the negotiating table. But the Israelis, they're not interested in negotiating. They want the Iranian nuclear program destroyed and its missile program.
All right, former Middle East correspondent Nicole Johnston there for us. Thanks so much for your analysis. Well, back home, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese had earlier welcomed the US President's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran. Political reporter Nicole Hegarty has more.
So we heard earlier today both the government and the opposition condemning the strikes by Iran on Qatar, on the US airbase in Qatar. Then, a short time ago, we have received a statement from the Prime Minister in response to this reported ceasefire that President Trump has referenced on his Truth social media platform. That statement, just reading that, it says that Anthony Albanese in that statement says that Australia welcomes the President's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and again reiterates his government has consistently called for dialogue, diplomacy and de-escalation. He says the safety of Australians in the region is the government's priority, saying they continue to closely monitor developments and are deeply concerned about keeping Australians safe in the region, and they are continuing to closely monitor that as well. So that's the latest update we've heard following on from President Donald Trump's comments on social media that a ceasefire has been secured and will come into effect in the coming hours, Mel.
And Nicole, what is the latest for Australians trying to leave the region?
We're yet to hear an update post both the strikes overnight and also the reports of a ceasefire, but we have seen that the numbers have continued to grow over the recent days. That number of Australians and their family members looking to leave the region, so collectively Israel and Iran, is now in excess of 4,000. So over 4,000 people looking for assistance from the Department of Foreign Affairs to leave the area. A previous attempt last night to get some of those in Israel out of the region by a repatriation flight was cancelled amid further strikes from Iran on Israel. As I say, we haven't heard any more since this news of a ceasefire, but we have seen that the US, the State Department has reported that 7 flights have departed Israel carrying some 250 US citizens and family members out of Israel, so that the US has been able to facilitate some repatriation flights. But as to when Australia will be able to do likewise, we wait and see.
All right, Nicole Haggerty there for us in Canberra. Thank you. Uncertainty remains around 400 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that Iran is thought to possess. The International Atomic Energy Agency said last month that it was seriously concerned that Iran now had stocks of the substance at 60% purity, which is well above the level used for civilian purposes. The US and Israel have targeted Iran's nuclear sites, but it's not known if they've succeeded in destroying its nuclear program.
Once again, the Iranian nuclear facility at Fordo was attacked, this time by Israeli missiles, targeting what its military said were access routes to the site buried many metres below. This only hours after Donald Trump claimed Fordo had been obliterated by US bunker-busting bombs. The UN nuclear watchdog spoke instead of very significant damage, with plants and buildings hit at 2 other nuclear facilities. But what's worrying officials is not just the damage to Iran's nuclear equipment, but the whereabouts and status of the uranium it's already highly enriched.
We must return to the negotiating table, and for that, allow IAEA inspectors, the guardians on our behalf of the NPT, to go back to Iran's nuclear sites and account for the stockpiles of uranium, including, most importantly, the 400 kilograms enriched to 60%.
Experts say that uranium is likely to be held in gas form and could be contained in about 10 large pressurised canisters and easily transportable in 1 lorry. But it would need substantial equipment to enrich it further so it could be used in a bomb.
Iranians have told the IAEA, this was on June 12th before the Israeli military strikes, is that they have set up a new facility that is well protected, at which they would be able to enrich uranium. As far as we know, that location is not known, probably not to the Americans, probably not to the Israelis, but it would probably be a matter of weeks, if not months, to enrich that stockpile.
So that missing uranium could be anywhere. There have been reports it was removed from the 3 sites here, hit by the United States. It could be at a new unknown facility, or it could have been divided up and hidden in separate locations. While the White House says it's confident the bulk of the uranium was destroyed, the Israelis, for now, are being coy.
And we have interesting intel on that, which you'll excuse me if I don't share it with you.
Concerns remain about Iran's nuclear ambitions, even now.
My biggest fear would be for Iran to own and be able to use and deploy a nuclear weapon. It would be a stranglehold on Israel, on the whole region and other parts of the world.
Meanwhile, Iran stepped up its missile attacks on Israel, a country that neither confirms nor denies its own suspected nuclear capability.
The leader of the NATO alliance says the focus of this week's summit will be the war in Ukraine after the country's capital came under attack from Russian forces again. Ukrainian officials say at least 7 people have been killed and several apartment buildings damaged after Russia launched more than 350 drones and missiles. But there's concern developments in the Middle East could overshadow the NATO summit. Europe correspondent Elias Kluwer is in The Hague.
Kyiv under attack yet again. This Russian airstrike began in the dead of night with that terrifying buzz of drones being heard across the city. People made their way to various bomb shelters across the Ukrainian capital, but tragically at least 9 people have been killed. The Ukrainian military says it shot down at least 300 Russian drones. And the president of the country, Volodymyr Zelensky, spent Monday in the United Kingdom. First with the King at Windsor Castle, then the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, where he said he'd discuss once again imposing more sanctions on Moscow. Now, here in The Hague, the Secretary-General of NATO, Mark Rutte, has said that he's hoping this week's summit can see the alliance's countries agree on a 5% of GDP minimum defence spend. He says a majority of that new defence investment will go towards deterring Russia and protecting Ukraine.
But let me give you a few examples of what we will invest in. A 5-fold increase in air defence capabilities, because we see Russia's deadly terror from the skies over Ukraine every day, and we must be able to defend ourselves from such attacks.
The NATO Secretary-General says Russia remains the alliance's most direct and significant threat and will be the primary focus of this week's summit. But the presence of Donald Trump and a new war in the Middle East may see that get top billing.
Well, it's time for a check of the weather now. Here's Nate Byrne.
Widespread warnings are on through the southeast for a couple of things. Damaging winds, first of all, being felt in South Australia, then across Victoria and up into the south of New South Wales through the day on the mainland, and then around about lunchtime developing for the north of Tasmania and across the Bass Strait Islands. For the most part, we're looking at gusts 90 to 100 kilometres an hour, but for the Alpine peaks in the southeast, it looks more like 110 kilometres an hour. Along with that, we've got coastal hazard warnings for abnormally high tides for the Gulfs in South Australia, right along the Victorian coast as well, and for a couple of places both for the east and west coasts in Tasmania. That's likely to lead to some low-lying coastal inundation as this major frontal system, or in fact complex frontal system, blasts through. There's a low and it's just pushing front over the southeast at the moment, driving those winds. Now inland it's likely to pick up some dust storms, but we're also going to see plenty of falls starting with the west of the Divide area in New South Wales. That will head eastwards as that first front goes through, and then the next one comes in and helps to intensify falls through South Australia and Victoria in particular. And then tomorrow we'll see it picking up even more as the next front comes through. It's going to be really, really soggy, but then beyond that, the system shifts off pretty quickly and we're replaced by mostly clear skies. Just some showers continuing in the east. Parts of northern Queensland will get a bit of a drop there too, with onshore winds continuing. But for most of us, we're looking very much settled from, well, Thursday onwards. Between now and then, though, some big falls for the southeastern corner. We're looking at Wednesday also a cold blast coming up with that last front. That will help deliver some snow to the Alps. Very good, since the rain that we've had already and what we're getting today is largely ruining the good white stuff that we've had. Could be 40 to 50 centimetres. Between now and then, though, plenty of wet weather to talk about. Queensland, if you're in the west or the northwest, it's clear skies. Everywhere else, at least isolated showers. The focus today will be for the northeast and then for the southeast and for the southern interior. Brisbane's getting to 24. Just a shower or two for you. We're looking anywhere between nothing and maybe 3 millimetres. For New South Wales, the focus to start on west of the Divide. That shifts eastwards and eases later in the day, just as wet weather picks up again through the south and around the ranges. For Sydney, you're getting to 21. Again, a couple of millimetres in showers for you. But Canberra, rain, and it could be 30 millimetres in the gauges. You're getting to 14. In Victoria, it's pretty soggy too. We'll see things really picking up again through this afternoon. It's starting wet in the east, but then that secondary burst will start. We're looking maybe snow down to 1,100 metres tonight as well. It's getting to 15 in Melbourne. You've got some showers and it's another windy day. In Tasmania, it's looking pretty wet too. Look, most of the falls for the north and the west, storms in the mix here too. We're looking at some showers potentially developing for Hobart. It's getting to 15. If you get any, it'll happen this evening. Over in South Australia, it's already been a wet start. We've got small hail in the southeast, dust storms inland, the odd coastal storm as well. Adelaide could see 25 millimetres in the gauges. It's aiming for 14. If we're lucky, some of those falls could push up as far as the bottom of the pastorals. Over in Western Australia, there's just a little bit of wet weather for the southern coastal districts, pushing a little bit further inland in the southeast. Perth looking fine. You're getting to 19. And then up north, clear skies almost across the board, just some wet weather for the north of Arnhem Land. For Darwin, though, it's staying dry, getting to 31.
This is ABC News. I'm Melissa McKay. These are the top stories we're following this morning. The Iranian Foreign Minister says there's no agreement on any ceasefire or cessation of military operations between Israel and his country. But in a statement, he said if Israel stops its illegal aggression against Iranians, then Tehran will not retaliate further. Mr. Araqchi said the final decision on the cessation of Iran's military operations will be made later. Earlier, US President Donald Trump posted on social media that the warring parties had agreed to a staged cessation of hostilities. President Trump's announcement came hours after Iran launched missiles at a US military base in Qatar. Officials say the attack was successfully intercepted and no one was injured as the base had been evacuated earlier in the day. President Trump labelled the retaliatory attack a very weak response. The developments in the Middle East come as leaders prepare to gather in Brussels for this week's NATO summit. The leader of NATO says allies must up their defence spending to deter Russia after Moscow launched yet another deadly attack on the Ukrainian capital. More than 350 drones and missiles were fired, killing at least 9 people in and around Kyiv. And Virgin Australia has been relisted on the Australian share market 5 years after it went broke during the pandemic. The company's stock debuted at $2.90 a share. This values the company at less than $3 billion. The E-Safety Commissioner is urging the government to rethink its plan to exempt video streaming giant YouTube from Australia's teen social media ban. The ban on under-16s using social media is due to take effect in December, despite ongoing questions about how it will be achieved and the decision to give YouTube a carve-out. For more, we're joined now by the ABC's national technology reporter, Angela Wappier. Hi there, Ange. So what has the E-Safety Commissioner said to the Australian government?
Well, the E-Safety Commissioner, Julian Mangrant, has told the government in no uncertain terms that she doesn't think YouTube should be exempt from the ban. We're told that the ban was always meant to cover most social media companies, major social media companies, but some draft rules that came out earlier this year suggested that YouTube wouldn't be included. That prompted all kinds of outcry from their competitors and some concerns from experts as well that there wasn't really a good rationale for carving out YouTube. The minister at the time, Michelle Rowland, said that it was to do with the educational uses of that platform. So the E-Safety Commissioner has written to the minister now saying that it shouldn't be carved out, that YouTube has a lot of the same characteristics and manifests the same harms or similar harms to its competitors, and that in keeping with the aim, the goal of the ban, YouTube should be included.
Yeah, just take us through why YouTube was exempt in the first place.
Yeah, so we were told that it was to do with educational reasons. It was an educational resource, and it certainly is a resource in the classroom and for parents. But it also does contain those characteristics that worry people about a lot of social media platforms, things like endless scroll, and a lot of content on there endless scroll and also automatic play on, so that once a video finishes, another video comes along straight away without prompting, recommender algorithms, and a lot of content on that platform that is not suitable for children at all. The government didn't fully explain its rationale, and those rules that proposed to exempt YouTube were only ever draft rules. The next stage was always that the E-Safety Commissioner's advice would be sought before those rules were finalised, and that's what happened last week, and it's what's led to this pretty stunning advice from the E-Safety Commissioner, which is in stark contrast to what the government's position has been.
How significant a development is this?
Yeah, it is. I mean, as I say, you know, it's in stark contrast what the Safety Commissioner has to say to the government's position, and she hasn't made her position known hitherto. She's the regulator. Her role is to give advice to the government in this matter when prompted, and the government is meant to must seek that advice and then must consider it in making the rules. And the new Communications Minister, Annika Wells, has said that, you know, she'll carefully consider that advice, but it's a pretty major departure, I suppose, from what we've heard so far.
All right, national technology reporter Angela Vaupier there for us. Thank you. Returning overseas now, US Vice President J.D. Vance says US President Donald Trump has hit the reset button on peace for the Middle East. Speaking on Fox News, he says Iran will have to answer to the US military if they attempt to revive their nuclear program.
What it means, Brett, is quite simple. First of all, the president, without, knock on wood, having a single American casualty, obliterated the Iranian nuclear program. We are now in a place where we weren't a week ago. A week ago, Iran was very close to having a nuclear weapon. Now, Iran is incapable of building a nuclear weapon with the equipment they have because we destroyed it. So that's a very, very big thing. Now, what that means, I think, is we have to talk to Iran and, of course, to Israel about what the future holds. Because while we have obliterated the Iranian nuclear program, our hope and our expectation is that they're not going to try to rebuild that program. And I think that's what the president is really trying to figure out here, is to build a long-term settlement here to where we can have peace in the region, where our regional allies and, of course, the American people, most importantly, can be secured, but where we can ensure that the destruction of the Iranian nuclear program that has already happened is not something they try to rebuild.
The Iranian government survives as is. What's to stop it from rebuilding over time if they, in fact, moved the 60% highly enriched uranium? You know, that's the concern.
No, the big concern, Brett, and this is, again, what we destroyed, is their ability to enrich uranium. If they have 60% enriched uranium, but they don't have the ability to enrich it to 90%, and further, they don't have the ability to convert that to a nuclear weapon, that is mission success. That is the obliteration of their nuclear program, which is why the president, I think, rightly is using that term. But here's the question. If Iran is desperate to build a nuclear weapon in the future, then they're going to have to deal with a very, very powerful American military again.
Many Australians travelling through the Middle East have been impacted by airstrikes overnight. Some have been left stranded in the Qatari capital after the country briefly closed its airspace.
People are rightly concerned, and when I returned to the hotel here, thick traffic. My driver was already talking about people panic buying food and water, but the sense of normality returned within a couple of hours. The roads thinned out. People here at the hotel are accepting that we just have to knuckle down and rest for the time being until we know more about what's going to happen next. Certainly, I would be very happy to get back to my family who's in Paris. So that's what I hope will be the case as quickly as possible.
I honestly thought that I was going to make it home just in time. Not quite, apparently. This morning when I was boarding at Dublin, I had a moment where all of the check-in staff walked away from the check-in desk with really, really stern faces, and I thought that my flight was going to be cancelled then, and I thought if I get to Doha, I'll be fine, I'll make it home. And we were, I think, 45 minutes to an hour off boarding, unfortunately for us. But I think that we're safer being on the ground than in the air, and we're safer being in the airport than in hotels outside as well, I believe. But hopefully things will be safe to leave soon and not stuck here too long, because there's only so many trips up and down the travelator you can do before you get a bit too bored.
Well, let's bring back former Middle East correspondent Nicole Johnston, who's been with us throughout the morning. Nicole, hi there. So we've just heard from Iran's foreign minister saying that military operations continued until the very last minute at 4 a.m. It's now just past 5 a.m. in Tehran. This seems to suggest that hostilities may have ended. What do you make of these statements that we've just had?
It's really been a confusing number of different statements that we've had over the last 45 minutes. As you said, this one arrived 17 minutes after the first tweets that we had from Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araqchi. Let me read it out to you so we know exactly the wording, because a lot can change just from the words. The military operations of Iranian armed forces to, quote, punish Israel for its aggression continued until the very last minute at 4 a.m. So as you said, it does sound as though from the Iranian perspective, they are going to lay down their weapons and essentially stop firing missiles towards Israel. Now, we haven't heard from the Israelis. That's what's been so extraordinary about the last few hours. This is the only statement that we've had from the Iranians, these few tweets over the last few hours. We're still waiting to hear from the Israelis, but a confusing picture emerging there, because it was only in the last hour that we heard the Iranian Foreign Minister in another statement say that this was not the end, this was not a permanent cessation of hostility. But it's perhaps not surprising, because this is often the case in the lead up to the end of a conflict. You'll have a sort of interim ceasefire agreement, and that is what this begins to sound like, while both sides stop firing, cool the temperature back down, a bit of a pause, a break, and then the negotiations and the real talks start. Because so far it all sounds like this is a deal that has been orchestrated by the United States with their allies in Qatar, a show of strength by the Iranians, able to hit the Al Ubaid air base, or at least fire missiles towards it in Qatar. This is the US's biggest military base in the Middle East. And then we heard from President Trump saying that it was a ceasefire, that there would be an end to the war, a staggered ceasefire agreement with various timelines and deadlines. But it has been a confusing picture. So until we actually definitively hear that there are no missiles hitting Tel Aviv and no missiles hitting Tehran, we need to wait and see exactly what's going to happen.
Absolutely, and I guess how difficult is it to get that information around whether these hostilities have actually stopped, whether the strikes have ceased, as these tweets sort of seem to indicate?
I don't think it will be very difficult. I think we'll find out in the next sort of half an hour or so. We get information from the Israeli side all the time about the degree and the number of missiles that are coming from the Iranians. The Iranians, according to their own state television, they have been broadcasting the types of hits that they have had from the Israelis. We know that in the lead up to this, there has been a very heavy bombardment of Tehran by the Israelis. No surprise, this always happens in the lead up to the end of fighting, even if it's a temporary cessation of the violence. Both sides will try and drop as much payload or missiles and weaponry on each other as they can. That's what we're seeing right now. But it sounds as though the Iranians are backing off, that they want to stop firing. We haven't heard from the Israelis, and we haven't had an update on the situation inside Tehran really in the last sort of half an hour or so. But it's not, it won't be difficult for us to get that information in the hours coming forward.
It has been a very confusing morning, as you've said, Nicole. We heard initially about the idea of this ceasefire from US President Donald Trump, of course, posting to social media. Is it at all possible here, do you think, that Donald Trump made this announcement without speaking to Iran?
I don't know that he would have spoken directly to Iran, but there would have been talks going on between the US and the Omanis and the Qataris, who would have relayed those conversations to Iran. It would seem extraordinary for Trump to come out with a statement like this without getting the buy-in from everyone. But these are unpredictable days. Trump is a mercurial character. We never know exactly what he's going to do. But it would still seem quite a stretch for him to put out a statement and a tweet this morning saying that there's an agreement, an end to the war, and then we find out that he hasn't spoken and gotten the buy-in from everyone. We really don't know. We would really just be guessing to say, but we know that these back-channel talks had been going on, so we just need to wait and see what the Israelis have to say. The Iranians are putting out their own messages. It does sound like they want to stop fighting. It does sound as though they are potentially up for an interim ceasefire agreement pending more talks, because as we were discussing before, Mel, I don't see the Iranians easily sort of rolling over after all of this and giving up their nuclear program, agreeing to eliminate their missiles, agreeing to stop funding proxies in the region. And one other really important point, how much trust do you really think that the Iranians have for President Trump right now? That could be another part of the problem, because we know that the Iranians were in the middle of negotiations with the Europeans about their nuclear program when this war broke out with Israel that was started by the Israelis with most likely the green light from the Americans.
So, Nicole, if this is a ceasefire that is to hold, what's next, do you think, for the region?
If this ceasefire holds and both sides lay down their weapons and stop firing missiles at each other, then they need to go back to talks, because diplomacy is the only way to try and resolve this crisis in the Middle East. Israel is not interested in diplomacy. They have made that clear. They don't trust the Iranians. They don't believe what they have to say. They don't think they will stick to any agreement that is ever reached, and that's why the Israelis have been insistent that, from their perspective, the only answer to deal with the Iranian, quote, nuclear threat is to go in and destroy their program, destroy their ballistic missiles. And we're hearing more and more from the Israeli side and from the Americans, almost goading the Iranians to rise up against the regime. We are not seeing any sign of that yet. The Europeans want to be involved. The UK wants to be involved. They are some of the original orchestrators of the JCPOA. That was the first nuclear deal that was signed between the Iranians and the international community back in 2015. So what will happen next? Potentially, the Iranians will go back to the table if they feel that they are under enough pressure to do so, if they feel that they have had their show of strength by attacking this airbase in Qatar. They may be persuaded to go back and talk to the Europeans, but their problem is they will have very little faith and trust in the American position, because from the way they view things, they will feel as though they have been burned a couple of times by President Trump. First, when the US withdrew from the first nuclear deal in 2018, and then, as I just said, when the Iranians were in negotiations and early stage talks with the Europeans, with the Americans, and we then had the outbreak of this war.
All right, former Middle East correspondent Nicole Johnston there for us. Thank you so much for your analysis and insights this morning. Well, Amelia Terzon is here now with your business news.
Australian investors appear to be optimistic this morning as the situation in the Middle East continues to develop. The ASX is up around 1% right now, although it has been wavering a bit. Energy stocks like Beach and Viva are losing ground, and that is as oil prices pull back. They had been rising on concerns that Iran would block access to supply. And despite oil prices coming back down, commodities analyst Daniel Hines is warning that the situation in the Middle East is still fraught.
The geopolitical sort of tensions still remain relatively elevated, and we do hold the view, I suppose, that there's still a potential risk for supply disruptions down the track. I don't think oil prices will completely wipe out the gains that we've seen since Friday's attack on Iran by Israel.
And in other finance news this morning, the airline Virgin is being relisted on the Australian share market right now, 5 years after it went broke during the pandemic. The company's stock is being relisted at $2.90 a share. This values the company at less than $3 billion, which is a fifth of the size of its nearest rival Qantas. Virgin is relisting today as administrators are still trying to find a buyer for another failed airline, Rex. The consumer watchdog has been warning that domestic flights competition is decreasing here in Australia. Queensland's Premier has been out today noting how important competition is in more regional and remote parts of the country.
We're the most decentralised state in the country, and that in order to make sure that you can maintain those connections, you need more than just one viable airline. So we want to see an airline space where those companies are doing the right thing by the commuters, and we want them to be profitable and viable, but we also want them to have a real investment and a real interest in our state.
And that's Finance. Mel, I'll keep you updated throughout the day.
Thanks, Amelia. Well, health experts warn the number of Australians vaccinated against influenza is worryingly low as the winter flu season gets well underway. Flu cases have increased around the country since last month, following a record number of infections earlier this year. But immunology researcher Julie Leask warns the number of official cases is just the tip of the iceberg.
We've definitely got a lot of flu, COVID, and another virus called respiratory syncytial virus, or RSV. And of course, there are plenty of other viruses around as well. We're definitely undercounting for COVID and flu and RSV for that matter. Really, what you see in notifications in the official stats is the tip of the iceberg. And there are many, many more people with each of those viruses around. So we are seeing definitely an uptick in those notifications, and that means that we know that there's more of COVID and flu around at the moment. Of course, RSV is just around quite a lot generally right now as well. For COVID, we're seeing a big rise in COVID cases in the notifications. What we're seeing now is a big rise in a new variant of COVID-19. It's called the NB1.8.1 variant. And for flu, we're seeing a rise, and we are at the start of the flu season. So for influenza, each year we get about 62% of people over 65 years of age vaccinated. But for the very young children between age 6 months and 5 years of age, only over 20% get vaccinated. And that vaccine, for the flu vaccine for the young kids, is free. It's recommended. Kids can get really sick with flu. It's not quite like COVID, which particularly affects older people. Kids and older people can get really sick with flu. And that's why it's really important right now to get that vaccine if you haven't had it, or get it for your child. And also for anyone over 6 months who's Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and also people over 18 who have any kind of chronic disease, immunocompromise. The yearly flu vaccine is recommended for them as well. But really, anyone over the age of 6 months can have a flu vaccine. Some people, it will be free for them. Some people have to pay a little bit for it. They can go to their GP, their pharmacist, their Aboriginal Medical Service. So it's pretty easy to get and really important right now.
Time for sports news now. Here's Catherine Murphy.
Carlton captain Patrick Cripps has thrown his support behind under-pressure coach Michael Voss. Voss is well and truly under the blowtorch after the Blues lost to North Melbourne, their 8th defeat of the season. The loss has ignited a strong response from fans and media alike, some of whom want to see change. The club has had 4 head coaches since Mick Malthouse left in 2015.
I couldn't speak highly enough of Vossi as a coach, also as a mentor and a friend. He puts a lot of work in, along with the whole coaches. Well, that group's very aligned, so we're in it together. We're not going to point fingers, we're not going to point blame at anyone else. We're going to take complete ownership.
Wallabies fullback Tom Wright says he's looking forward to the Lions series, having watched the 2013 instalment when he was at high school. The Brumbies star has been selected for the Wallabies test against Fiji in Newcastle next weekend. Wright was omitted from Eddie Jones' World Cup squad in 2023. He insists he never felt hard done by after the career setback.
It is what it is, what happened in 2023, and what was I disappointed for sure. Did I want to be part of it? Definitely. Was it something I'll remember for a long time? Yeah, absolutely. But, am I excited by the chance to play Fiji next week? Yeah, like, bloody earth. So it's like if you're going to keep looking in the rearview mirror, like, you're going to be, like, sort of panning back on, like, a pretty long career. I'd rather just look forward, to be fair with you.
Matilda's midfielder Claire Wheeler says it's important all members of the side buy into the attacking philosophy of new coach Joe Montemuro. He's named a squad of 33 for the Matilda's upcoming games in Perth and Bunbury. 24 of those players will be available for the first 2 matches against Slovenia. The remaining 9 will be swapped in for the series with Panama. Wheeler says the size of the camp gives everyone in the Matilda's squad a chance to learn from the new coach.
Obviously, we only have a short amount of windows to not only learn Joe's style of play, but also to play with each other in that style. So I think it's really good that we have, a lot of players coming in and getting that exposure.
Australia's #1 ranked female tennis player Daria Kasatkina has lost in the first round of the Eastbourne Open. Kasatkina went into the tournament the defending champion but lost to New Zealander Lulu Sun in 3 sets, 7-5, 2-6, 6-3. Kasatkina's defeat means she has lost all 3 matches on grass since reaching the last 16 on clay at Roland Garros. Wimbledon starts next week.
That's the latest in ABC News for now. There's more on the ABC News app and, of course, anytime on ABC iView. I'm Melissa McKay. Thanks for your company this morning. Ros Childs is up next for more on our top stories, including the developments out of the Middle East. Stay with us here on the ABC News channel.
We are off to see something that's not happened in decades.
Doctors are blowing the whistle on what went wrong.
This was probably not a great deal and there is no plan B here.
Is it possible a human has already been infected?
Yeah, it might.
Why are members saying they're trying to grab the money?
Because it's a smear campaign.
Get behind the car, behind the car.
Right now, it's hard to believe in the American dream.
I work for a better Australia for all of us.
7:30 tonight, ABC TV and ABC iView.
For truth in advertising.
When you drink beer, you're not really drinking the beer. You're drinking the proposition.
Officer, I just had a couple of propositions.
And the subtle art of the sell.
And when you say dupes, just so we're clear, you mean duplicates, right? Like they have knockoff versions, like me and Adam Hills.
Except no substitutes.
Now you say which one's the quality one.
Ruin, tomorrow at 8 on ABC TV and ABC iView.
Every day, all around Australia, extraordinary people create moments that inspire. See them, hear them. All you have to do is nominate them at australianoftheyear.org.au.
It's the show that's got
solid gold
and real star power.
Are you saying there might one day be a Miff Warhurst laneway?
Where the bins are, yeah.
Marsha Hines brings the vocals.
Mercy.
There's the weirdest instrument you've ever heard.
We met in the Star Wars meet and greet.
What is going on?
And a sign-off like no other.
Kate Sobrano is going to play a medley of Oz rock classics.
Spicks and Specs, Sunday 7:30 on ABC and ABC iView.
Hello, sweetness.
What does Frankie want back here?
Vengeance comes to mind. Oh, how they shall pay.
New Bay of Fires, Sunday at 8, or stream from the start on ABC iView.
Today, Donald Trump claims Iran and Israel have agreed to a ceasefire, but senior Tehran officials say a decision is yet to be made. While the opening and closing of airspace over the Middle East causes travel chaos across the globe. Safety Commissioner urges the government to include YouTube in its planned social media ban for young people. And Virgin Australia returns to the ASX during a precarious period for international travel. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ros Childs. It's unclear whether a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, announced by the US President Donald Trump, will go ahead. Earlier on his Truth Social platform, Mr. Trump said a complete and total ceasefire would be phased in over 24 hours. But Iran's Foreign Affairs Minister says, as of now, there is no agreement. He says if the Israeli regime stops its aggression, Tehran has no intention of continuing its response, and the final decision on whether to cease military operations will be made later. So far, there's been no confirmation of the truce from Israeli leaders either. Overnight, Iran retaliated to the US bombing of its nuclear sites. This vision claims to show missiles being launched towards an American base in Qatar. There have been no reports of casualties.
This attack represents a blatant violation of the sovereignty of Qatar and a contradiction to the principles of good neighbourliness, and represents an aggression on international legitimacy and international law. And the state of Qatar confirms that it holds the right of response in accordance with the international laws and in accordance with the shape and size of this attack.
The Al Udeid Air Base serves as a main regional military hub for American forces and is located about 30 kilometres southwest of Doha. Despite widespread criticism for its retaliatory strikes, there were celebrations on the streets of Tehran. Israel says it has completed the most extensive wave of attacks it's ever carried out in Tehran. It included strikes beyond military and nuclear targets, reportedly on a prison housing political detainees. North America correspondent Cayman Gok joins us now from Washington. Hi there, Cayman. So the American president says it's time for peace. What's been the response to that in the US?
Well, it's been largely positive. This is a country that has been involved in several foreign wars, entangled in these wars for a long time. And, you know, he campaigned as an anti-war president. So Americans remember their involvement in Iraq, in Afghanistan. And to hear that there is this ceasefire has been very widely praised, and people are relieved to hear it. But this is an extraordinary turn of events for several reasons. Firstly, the president, the way it came out, it was on social media. He's said that this will be a staggered ceasefire, total and complete, and then upon the 24th hour, it will officially end what he's dubbed the 12-day war. He's thanked the stamina, courage and intelligence of Iran and Israel. And, you know, this is a president saying, God bless Israel, God bless Iran, God bless the Middle East, God bless the US and the rest of the world. It's also extraordinary because Iran says that's not necessarily the case. The foreign minister says there's no agreement or any ceasefire or any cessation of military operations. And he's said that, you know, if Iran will stop, if Israel stops, but the final decision on the cessation of our military operations will be made later. We haven't officially heard from Israel as well. We know that those two countries have continued earlier today firing at one another. Thirdly, the president's declaration came only hours after Iran actually launched a retaliatory attack on the US. It fired 14 missiles at the Al Udeid Air Base that was in Qatar. It's the US's largest military base in the Middle East. It can host 10,000 military and civilian active Americans. Now, Donald Trump said that there were no casualties to that and there was minimal damage. He said that he called it pathetic, I believe. Or he said very weak, sorry. And he said that of the 14 missiles, 13 were knocked down. One was set free because, in his words, it was heading in a non-threatening direction. And he termed it as, most importantly, they've gotten it all out of their systems. And therefore, hopefully, there'll be no further hate. So after posting that, a couple hours later, he then said that there's this ceasefire in place. Now, The US also warned that if Iran retaliated with force and didn't come to the table for peace, then their response to Iran would be far greater than what it saw when it launched that attack on the 3 Iranian nuclear facilities only 2 days ago. But the president is unpredictable. He can pivot quickly, and it appears that he is now pushing for this position of peace. But just because even if this ceasefire does take place, it's not the end, and it means that there could be, what happens next? Will there be negotiations around the future of Iran's nuclear program? So there is still a way to go.
So has Donald Trump, though, been navigating a tricky path here, Cayman?
Definitely, because he campaigned so heavily as this peace president, this anti-war president. He was so critical of the previous involvements, both Democratic and Republican leaders getting the US involved in foreign wars. He attacked the Iraq war. He said there were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. Meanwhile, he has bombed Iran, which for the moment, the US and the White House haven't actually said they had weapons of mass destruction. They said they had everything they need to build a nuclear weapon. All it took was an order from the supreme leader, but they haven't provided evidence that there was such an order. Nevertheless, the president says that this was a necessary preemptive strike, rather, to hurt this program, to set it back, because he has consistently said that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. But, as a president who campaigned on an anti-war platform to then strike inside Iran using the largest conventional bombs the United States has, bombs that had never been used in warfare before, these massive ordnance penetrators, also known as bunker busters, to drop 14 of them on 2 nuclear sites and then fire Tomahawk missiles on a third, did get a lot of his supporters worried that he was breaking this promise. But then, and they were very vocal as well about it in the lead up, but now that he has appeared to announce this proposed ceasefire, if that is successful, then he has not only struck at the heart of Iran's nuclear facilities and its nuclear program, something America has been concerned about for decades, but he may have also avoided the US getting entangled in another prolonged war in the Middle East.
Cayman, thank you. Let's go now to former Middle East correspondent Ben Knight for more. Hi there, Ben. So Cayman, they're saying this isn't over. Let's start with this announced ceasefire, first of all. How confident is the international community that this will happen?
It's a very interesting question because it took a long time for both the Iranians and the Israelis to actually confirm that. And as far as I'm aware, we haven't had a confirmation from Israel yet. It's just gone 5 o'clock in the morning, so perhaps that's understandable, but look, it would be absolutely shocking if Israel undercut President Trump in that way. But it did, again, take the Iranians some time to confirm it, and even then it was, yes, we're doing this, but this is on our terms. So there's a bit of perhaps gamesmanship going on. But look, it appears that it's going to come into effect. Israel hit Tehran particularly hard overnight. And in its own words said this is our biggest attack on Tehran yet. Interestingly, going well beyond nuclear targets, which was how this all began, and really hitting some more targets of the regime. There was thinking at the time that perhaps this is ramping up, or perhaps this is Israel getting in some final shots before the ceasefire took place. So look, we don't know if those exchanges of fire are still going on, but it certainly looks like, as President Trump said, when their missions end, that will be it, and it looks like that's going to come into effect.
OK, so if it does happen, what's the plan for it? Because it's meant to be staggered, isn't it?
Look, there's a 24-hour deadline. Look, who knows what's going to happen. I think the important thing is that Israel and Iran stop firing at each other.
Right, well, let's look at the event then that preceded this ceasefire being announced. That's Iran's retaliatory response, of course, to the US attack on its nuclear facilities that happened at the weekend. What's your view of the choice of the target that they made and also the intensity of that response. What do you think?
Yeah, we spent yesterday speculating on what the Iranian response might be and when it might come. It did take a while to come, but as we woke up this morning and learned that it had happened. The target was the Al Udeid air base. It's the largest and most significant American military base or air base in the Middle East. So that clearly is why it was chosen to send that message. But interestingly, it was not a... They knocked on the door first, essentially. They warned that the missiles would come in so that people were not injured. And most of them were shot out of the sky. So, look, it was enough for Iran to make a show of strength, to make a retaliation, to save a bit of face without doing something that would provoke the United States into retaliation and just be sort of cycling out from there, which is what we were worried about.
So if there is a ceasefire then, Ben, and Iran and Israel cease hostilities, what happens then?
Look, it's interesting. A ceasefire can take place, but it is not a truce. It's not a nuclear deal. Iran's nuclear facilities have been hit. We still don't know exactly what the damage was. And as we've said, in some ways that's irrelevant because Iran still maintains a quantity of nuclear material. It's been enriched, not to weapons grade, but pretty close. It maintains the knowledge to be able to produce a bomb. And Donald Trump has not got Iran back to the nuclear deal that existed previously. So the question is, if Iran feels like it's under pressure and it's just been smacked around militarily in the way that it has been by Israel and the United States, has it been deterred from building a bomb or has it been encouraged to race towards building one? Because that is still entirely possible. Iran has also talked about pulling out of the International Atomic Energy Agency and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So that is very significant. The only other country of any size that's done that is North Korea. So if Iran puts itself in that kind of company, it also essentially puts itself out of the reach of international nuclear weapons inspectors, and that is dangerous territory.
Ben, thank you.
Thanks, Ros.
Well, let's bring in our political reporter now, Nicole Hegarty in Canberra. So, Nicole, how has the federal government responded to these developments?
Hi, Ros. Well, early this morning we heard condemnation of the strikes overnight on Qatar from the government, saying that that was not something that they supported. The opposition echoed that. When it comes to these reports from the US President Donald Trump about this ceasefire, the possibility of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, the Albanese government has welcomed that. Reading from a statement, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese says Australia welcomes President Trump's announcement of a ceasefire between Israel and Iran, and again reiterates his government's consistently called for dialogue, diplomacy and de-escalation. He says that the safety of Australians in the region is the government's priority, saying they continue to closely monitor developments and are deeply concerned about keeping Australians safe. So that's the latest update we've heard. We haven't heard more since the comment from Iran's foreign minister about the fact this has not necessarily been something agreed to as yet, but that statement put out by the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese earlier today, Ros.
And there are thousands of Australians in the region, Nicole. What's the latest information on plans to get them out of the region?
Well, Ros, the latest detail we have is that that number of Australians and family members collectively across both Iran and Israel sits at more than 4,000. The majority of those, some 2,900, have registered as wanting assistance to leave Iran, and a further 1,300 Australians and family members have registered with the Department of Foreign Affairs as wanting assistance to leave Israel. We haven't heard more detail repatriation flights being rescheduled. Since yesterday, there was one. A group of some 40 Australians in Israel were gathered together, and there were plans afoot to leave on a plane during a small window of opportunity, but that was then cancelled because of a separate bunch of strikes from Iran on Israel. Since then, the US, and since the news of this potential ceasefire, the US, it's been reported from the State Department in the US that there's been 7 planes carrying some 250 US citizens and their family members leave Israel. As for what that means for Australians, we're yet to hear anything further on that, but it can only be seen as encouraging news.
OK, Nicole, thank you for the update there. Qatar's main international airport is slowly reopening after the nation briefly closed its airspace following Iran's attack on a nearby US base. The closure has left many Aussies stranded after their flights were cancelled. Kate Mead reports.
I'm at Melbourne International Airport, and since 3:30 this morning, information about airways and where is safe to travel has been changing. All the international airports across Australia are advising passengers to please check in with the airline that they are travelling with to get the up-to-date information about what is going on with those flights, particularly for today and the next couple of days. Now, earlier this morning, I was able to catch up with some of the passengers that had arrived from Dubai as they arrived here in Melbourne. Here's a little bit of what they had to say in terms of what it was like at the Dubai airport.
There was a lot more people around that were assisting and directing, and yeah, there's quite a few people there.
Did become a bit of a worry that we were a bit concerned and that we hadn't heard anything. So obviously we were a little bit dubious getting into Dubai. Yeah, it was mainly from home that we heard the news.
And so once again, the airports, the international airports around Australia are advising passengers that are flying to the Middle East either today or the next couple of days to check in with the airline that they are flying with to make sure that they have the most up-to-date information. And when they do arrive at airports, to allow that extra time.
Kate Mead reporting that. And Virgin Australia is relisting on the local share market as that uncertainty surrounds global air travel. Business reporter Amelia Turzon joins us now from Melbourne with more. Hi, Amelia. So how significant is today's listing?
Good afternoon. So this is the most hotly anticipated listing on the ASX so far this year. So on the background, Virgin was delisted from the ASX 5 years ago after it went broke during the pandemic. It was later pulled back from the brink by private equity firm Bain Capital, and now today the airline stock is finally being relisted. Its code is VGN and the stock debuted just moments ago at $2.90 a share. And as I'm speaking to you, Roz, the share price is already rising. It's up above $3.16 so far, which does show that investors are optimistic about the airline's future, at least today. Even at this price, though, this still puts Virgin's value at about a fifth of Qantas, which is worth $15 billion. And it's worth noting that Virgin is relisting today as administrators are still trying to find a buyer for another failed airline, Rex. And also, as the consumer watchdog has been warning that this year domestic flights competition is decreasing. So there's more riding on this than just Virgin's investor fortunes. It's also about boosting competition here in Australia.
And on broader markets, Amelia, what impact is this potential ceasefire between Israel and Iran having on markets?
So this morning so far, we've had the Australian share market going higher. It has been waving around a little bit, but it mostly appears investors are taking Donald Trump's call as a positive. We've had energy stocks like Beach and Viva losing ground, and that's as oil prices drop down. Oil was, of course, rising quite a bit as there was fears the conflict would hit supply and as Iran was threatening to block a crucial shipping channel. Analysts have been noting that despite all the conflict and fears of a broader escalation, markets have been relatively calm in the scheme of things, and possibly investors are trying to be optimistic. And And as you can see here, Roz, we've got some numbers up. The ASX is up around 1% or just a little bit less than right now. And as I mentioned, it is still wavering around. And as I mentioned, we've had energy stocks losing ground so far today. And here is the oil price. Brent crude down now below $70 a barrel. It was hovering quite a few dollars higher than that in the last couple of days. And gold is also falling back. And that's finance for you so far this afternoon, Roz.
Thanks, Amelia. The eSafety Commissioner is urging the government to rethink its plan to exempt video streaming giant YouTube from Australia's teen social media ban. The ban on under-16s using social media is due to take effect in December, despite ongoing questions about how it will be achieved and the decision to give YouTube a carve-out. Well, for more, we're joined by the ABC's national technology reporter, Ange Lavoie-Pierre. Good to see you, Ange. So what's the Safety Commissioner said to the government on this?
Well, Julian Mingrant has written to the Communications Minister, Annika Wells, as she was asked to do, to give her advice, and that advice is that YouTube should be captured by the ban, the teen social media ban, which will come into effect in December. And there had been indications, strong indications from the government that it wouldn't be. So Julian Mingrant has suggested in that letter that children experience all the same kinds of harms on that platform, on YouTube, that they experience elsewhere, and are designed, that the ban is designed to prevent. She's basically saying YouTube is no different, or not sufficiently different, at least from its competitors, in order to warrant the carve-out that was being considered by the government. She's putting that position more fully today at National Press Club. She's launching research that her office has conducted demonstrating that point. They've surveyed 2,600 children between the ages of 10 and 15, and they've found that 4 in 10 children reported exposure to harmful content on YouTube. So, a sort of significant number, and proving her point, or showing, what she's saying there, that YouTube really is, it doesn't deserve any special consideration. She's also told the minister that, as a matter of principle, the rules that she makes should avoid carving out, naming specifically any platforms, as the draft rules did with YouTube. So it's unambiguous advice, and it's in contrast to the government's position thus far.
Why was YouTube exempt in the first place then?
Well, we've got some indication about that. Earlier this year, the government released draft rules, as I say, carving out YouTube by name. But the reasons why, what the minister, the then minister, Michelle Rowland, said was that YouTube was valuable as an educational resource for parents and for teachers. And whilst it was used for entertainment purposes, that was different from other social media platforms in that that wasn't its primary use, and it had significant educational benefits. This letter from the eSafety Commissioner says that nevertheless, whatever the educational value, the harms are still manifest. And she goes on in her letter to point out that YouTube will still be accessible to parents and teachers and children, but just without logging in under the ban.
Okay, so what are the next steps?
Well, there's still a great deal we don't know about how the ban will work. Certainly, the government is yet to finalise which platforms even will be covered, and then what those platforms will have to do in order to comply, in order to make sure that 20-something million Australians have had their age checked sufficiently in order to go online. So the new minister, Annika Wells, has said that she'll carefully consider the eSafety Commissioner's advice, and they'll be looking to get some of those details firmed up in the coming months.
Ange, thank you.
Thanks.
The judge in the trial of accused mushroom triple murderer Erin Patterson is currently delivering his final instructions